Chapter 40, Exchanging Weapons/P. That's right, Li Sha. I'm Xiao Lu. Liang Xiao Lu spoke, her voice dripping with emotion as she confirmed her friend's words. Xiao Lu, it really is you, that's great. I thought that you had already escaped from this place. I never would have imagined that I would see you here. Li Sha, the girl in front of Liang Xiao Lu, was just as happy, and continued to hug her once thought to be lost friend. The two girls joined in a tight embrace. Li Sha was laughing out loud. Liang Xiao Lu, I didn't think we'd be able to meet again after losing each other in the forest. This really makes me happy. Hello, said a youth wearing clothing as tattered as the other two. I'm so glad to have met the two of you here. How should I put this? I'm not sure if you want, but would you be willing to join our group? If you do, I can certainly guarantee that together our group will be much stronger and consequently will make hunting magical beasts a lot easier. And besides, danger lurks around every corner in these woods. It'd be better if we worked together. His tone was first likable as he walked up to Jian Chen and Tai Ta, but as soon as he saw that Jian Chen's clothes were entirely crimson with fresh blood, he couldn't help but express shock. The youth seriously doubted that the blood was all from Jian Chen, because anyone who lost that much blood would definitely be beyond weak. There was no way such a person could firmly stand there, with such a sharp look. Jian Chen shook his head, politely refusing, I'm sorry, but we were just planning to leave this place, so we cannot join your group. The youth had an expression of regret on his face. However, he still reconciled, my two fellow students, although the magical beasts here are quite formidable, we have strength in numbers. As long as everyone is willing to work together, even if we meet two magical beasts at once, they definitely won't pose any threat. If everyone hands over 2 Class 1 magic stones, I believe that we will soon gather enough. The youth continued to press the issue. His gaze was quite sharp, and it was obvious that he had already realized that Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's strengths were above average. We really do not have any other options. The two of us have already decided to leave here, so we cannot join your group. Please forgive us. In order to reciprocate the formal request, Jian Chen's tone was just as amiable. Hearing that Jian Chen and Tai Ta were set on leaving, the youth could not help but be disappointed. He really could not understand why, although only 1 out of the 3 days was remaining, the two people refused to stay. As long as they paid up 2 Class 1 magic stones, they'd be able to successfully join. Yet, Jian Chen and Tai Ta still chose to leave the area. Could it be that the two of them really wanted to pass up such an opportunity? The youth thought that Jian Chen and Tai Ta had given up and wanted to leave the forest. He couldn't have ever imagined that their leaving actually meant leaving the 2nd region to enter the 3rd region, not actually leaving the forest. At that moment, Tai Ta glanced at the battle axe that one of the students was holding. His eyes lit up in happiness, and he directly walked over to the student with an intrepid air, and asked in a muffled voice, Hey, if I give you 2 Class 1 magic stones, will you trade your battle axe for them? Asking this, Tai Ta pulled out the battle axe on his back with one hand, and used his other hand to retrieve from his space belt 2 Class 1 magic stones that were still covered in fresh blood. It was at that moment that the group of people realized that the large battle axe in Tai Ta's hands was covered in fresh blood. The entire surface had been dyed crimson. The appearance alone was beyond shocking. It looked as if it was a murder weapon that had been constantly doused by blood. What was even more disbelieving was that the battle axe, made of firm metal as hard as steel, had already been completely riddled with cracks. Moreover, some parts of the blade were even bent. Most people would not be able to believe this sight. They had all assumed that when Tai Ta had chosen his weapon, it had been like this from the beginning. There was no way they could have imagined that all of the axe's damages had been caused by Tai Ta himself. The student with the intrepid air looked at the beaten-up axe in front of him, which was so red that it looked like it had been made from blood, and was at a loss for a moment. When the other students heard Tai Ta's request, their eyes immediately lit up, and looked at the intrepid student with looks of envy, as if they were about to offer up their own weapons to trade with Tai Ta. My fellow student, I can exchange this sword of mine with you. A student carrying a giant one-handed sword walked over to Tia Ta and said with a smile. Hearing, Tai Ta looked down at the battle-axe that was in his grip, shook his head and spoke, "No need, I still prefer to use the battle-axe." Hearing this, the male suddenly had a face full of disappointment. At this moment, getting 2 Class 1 magic stones was more important than anything else. Not to mention him, if the others could, they would also be willing to trade their weapons to Tai Ta for 2 Class 1 magic stones. Even if their weapons were worth more than 2 Class 1 magic stones, they would still not hesitate. The tall and sturdy male was not dumb. After considering it for a bit, he happily handed over his battle-axe to fulfill the exchange. Who would be willing to refuse such a profitable exchange? After the exchange was completed, the group of people began to look at Tai Ta with a different light. A few of the smarter students had already connected the battle-axe's battered state to the possibility that Tai Ta had caused it. From this point, they could directly confirm Tai Ta's extraordinary strength. Otherwise, why else would he just casually hand over 2 Class 1 magic stones? This place wasn't like outside. Before entering the forest, the school administration had already confiscated any devices the students had. They had even patted the students' bodies down to thoroughly check. There was absolutely no way the magic stone could have been brought in from the outside. The only way that magic stones could be gained inside the forest was to hunt magical beasts. However, there was just one thing the people couldn't understand. If Tai Ta and Jian Chen had the strengths to hunt magical beasts, why didn't they want to stay in the forest for all 3 days? After all, the Academy's rules clearly dictated that they could only pass if they stayed for 3 days and paid up 2 Class 1 magic stones. If only one was fulfilled, they wouldn't pass. Could it be that they don't care about the rewards? Or perhaps they had lied about leaving, and actually just didn't want to kill magical beasts together with the few of us? Everyone could not help but think of these possibilities. When considering these thoughts, a few of the people immediately began to gaze at Jian Chen and Tai Ta with expressions of discontent. Jian Chen did not pay any mind to their expressions. He looked at the Liang Xiaolu and the girl she was hugging, and said, "Liang Xiaolu, since you found your friend now, why don't you just stick with this group? They have more people too." Liang Xiaolu slowly separated from the girl, and looked back at Jian Chen and Tai Ta. She nodded, "Then you two have to be careful." Afterwards, Tai Ta and Jian Chen didn't bother wasting any time, and immediately left the area. After the two of them had left, the girl called Li Sha asked in a resentful tone, "Xiaolu, who are they? They're so arrogant that they don't even think they should be with us." "Li Sha, you're mistaken. It's not that they don't want to be together with you guys, they really do want to leave here." Liang Xiaolu explained. "That can't be." Li Sha exclaimed in disbelief. "Li Sha, the fact that they could casually give away a Class 1 magic stone means that the two of them have the strength to kill magical beasts. Plus, when they were trading the 2 magical stones away for the weapon, it was obvious that they were planning on continuing to fight. How could they possibly be leaving this place?" "That's right, Xiaolu, you've been tricked by them," a youth standing on the side added. Liang Xiaolu smiled, "They're definitely leaving this place, but they didn't explain it clearly to you guys. They want to leave the 2nd region, and move on to the 3rd region to hunt the Class 2 magical beasts." "What? Liang Xiaolu, what kind of joke are you trying to pull? It's impossible for the two of them to go to the 3rd region to hunt Class 2 magical beasts. Could it be that their strengths have already reached Saint level? But that can't be right either. If they had reached the Saint level, then there would be no need to change weapons. Those two are really reckless, to want to go to the 3rd region. They're definitely seeking death." Immediately following Liang Xiaoli's words, the group of people immediately broke into chaos as they began to discuss in a frenzy amongst each other. None of them thought that Jian Chen and Tai Ta would be able to survive the 3rd region. Li Sha pulled at Liang Xiaoli's hands, and in a clearly disbelieving tone, she asked, "Xiaolu, they aren't really crazy enough to run over to the 3rd region, right? Liang Xiaolu nodded, that's right, they really did go to the third region. Li Sha, you cannot underestimate the two of them, they're really formidable. Liang Xiaolu said with conviction. Could it be that the two of them really are saints? Li Sha asked in shock. The school administration had clearly declared that all students that were saints had to enter the third region. There was no way they could have appeared in the second region. Liang Xiaolu shook her head, no, their powers haven't reached saint level yet, because they still haven't condensed their saint weapons. Hearing this, Li Sha's shock grew even more pronounced. Without reaching saint level, surviving in the second region was already difficult enough, let alone being in the third region. After all, the magical beasts in the third region were Class 2 magical beasts, which weren't any small amount stronger than Class 1 magical beasts. The two classes could not even be compared. Li Sha and Liang Xiaolu were close friends. Therefore, Liang Xiaolu didn't feel the need to hide anything from Li Sha. In a soft voice, she said, Li Sha, I'll just tell you this. Yesterday, I personally witnessed the two of them kill 70+ magical beasts by themselves. Li Sha was beyond shocked by this, as she exclaimed, what? Xiaolu, are you joking? The two of them killed 70+ magical beasts by themselves in one day. Li Sha was so astonished that she couldn't contain her voice. She had gradually become louder and louder, until the other 8 people were able to hear her quite clearly. In that instant, all of their expressions changed at the thought of Jian Chen and Tai Ta achieving what Liang Xiaolu had said, and their expressions were beyond disbelief. Li Sha, what did you say? Which two people were able to kill 70+ Class 1 magical beasts in a day? A youth asked. He could not accept the possibility that the two people were actually Jian Chen and Tai Ta, whom they had just met. Li Sha tried to calm her breathing, and grasped at her chest before pointing to Liang Xiaolu. In a trembling voice, she said, Xiaolu said that she personally witnessed the two people just now kill 70+ magical beasts in one day. Li Sha's tone reflected the fact that she thought such a possibility was inconceivable. Chapter 41, Flaming Cloud Beast/Pete, It can't be, Liang Xiaolu, what you're saying is ridiculous. Those two aren't even saints yet, to think they could kill over 70 magical beasts in a day. That's impossible. A youth with a pike said incredulously. That's right, it's too ridiculous. Even a saint wouldn't cut it, I think even a great saint wouldn't be able to kill that many Class 1 magical beasts in a single day, let alone half. I doubt their saint force is that unlimited. A bow-wielding girl said with doubt. At that moment, the youth that had invited Jian Chen and Tai Ta into the group said, Liang Xiaolu, do you know who they are? When did our Kargath Academy have such amazing people in it? They aren't saints, but to easily defeat Class 1 magical beasts. Just who are they? Saying this, he seemed to have immediately realized something, as his face rapidly changed colors. Liang Xiaoli's face looked proud as if she had done something honorable. With a laid-back tone, she said, I can tell you this, the one that just traded you a monster core for your battle axe was the one that set the academy abuzz, Tai Ta, the headmaster's apprentice. The other person is the freshman ruler of the annual freshman competition, Changyang Xiang Tian. Everyone cried out in alarm before talking amongst themselves in excitement. So it was those two abnormal people, no wonder their strength was that strong. It can't be. It said that Tai Ta fought Lord Cheng to a standstill at the library, that Changyang Xiang Tian was the one who beat the Saint Ka Di Yun in an intense duel. I was there watching the fight, Changyang Xiang Tian's strength was really amazing. I heard that outside the library, the middle-ranked Saint Luo Jian wasn't able to deal with Changyang Xiang Tian, and was even forced to use his saint weapon in the end. Without the burden of having Liang Xiaolu anymore, Tai Ta and Jian Chen's speed had risen exponentially, and so the two soon reached the third region. When they first entered the third region, they initially saw no difference in the two regions. But the further they advanced, the more hellish it became. Compared to the third region, the second region could be called a paradise. There were all sorts of magical beasts in the forest, and the land was full of swamps, so if one wasn't careful, they would find themselves stuck deep inside the waters. However, most of the swamps were man-made, so they weren't too deep. Otherwise, if no one came to rescue them, they wouldn't be able to escape with their lives. Perhaps it was because of the ground, but there wasn't much grass in the third region, so line of sight was much better than the second region. Jian Chen and Tai Ta cautiously trekked through the swamplands with a small amount of powder on them. This type of powder was a type of repellent that would prevent insects from biting them. Changyang Xiang Tian, it seems like you're familiar with the forest. Could it be you've been here before? How could you be this amazing? Tai Ta said, while looking at the layer of green dust on his body. Jian Chen chuckled and said, I read up a lot of books in the library about various places, so my understanding of the forests is relatively high. Ah, no wonder. Tai Ta realized. Right after Tai Ta spoke, Jian Chen's face stilled before becoming serious. At the same time, the ground began to shake, as if an earthquake was occurring. But before Jian Chen could say anything, Tai Ta had already sprung into action, his new battle-axe coming to rest in both his hands. Jian Chen glanced towards his left and spoke cautiously, Tai Ta, be careful. This time it looks like we've come across a large magical beast. Yeah. Tai Ta nodded his head as the expression on his face grew solemn. Because they were in the third region, this wasn't a Class 1 magical beast, but a Class 2 magical beast that was stronger than a Class 1 magical beast by many times over. It could fight against a great saint on even footing. Although its attack power wasn't all that strong yet, its strength still couldn't be underestimated. As the two of them nervously looked around, the magical beast finally came into view. Its entire body had red fur, and it spanned 3 meters tall and 5 meters wide. Protruding from its mouth, it had 2 long tusks, that looked as if they could penetrate through muscle with ease. If it weren't for the fact that the magical beast had a short nose, then Jian Chen would have thought that this was an animal that he had met in his previous world, the elephant. But this magical beast was a lot bigger than the elephant. Tai Ta, be careful, this is the Class 2 magical beast, the flaming cloud beast. It can spit out fire from its mouth and is quite hard to deal with. Jian Chen uttered the magical beast's name. Because he had read so many books in the library, he could recognize most magical beasts, and even knew of some of their special abilities. Tai Ta only nodded, as he wordlessly focused all of his attention on the flaming cloud beast, ready to strike at any moment. Ho! The gigantic flaming cloud beast roared as it started to move each of its 4 hooves towards Jian Chen and Tai Ta. With each stamp on the ground, the earth would to shake. Jian Chen's eyes flashed in concentration. I'll attack it from the front, Tai Ta, you go around and attack it from behind. Charging forward, he jumped into the air straight towards the flaming cloud beast's head. The moment Jian Chen had moved, Tai Ta started to move as well, and circled around the beast to come towards its behind. Standing on top of its head, Jian Chen let out a yell as his saint force gathered within his iron rod, before fiercely stabbing it into the head of the beast. Ding! As if made of steel, the head of the flaming cloud beast deflected Jian Chen's iron rod. It had only left a shallow line on its head, unable to penetrate through its defense. Jian Chen's face changed into a grimace. Although he knew the flaming cloud beast had a strong defense, he hadn't thought that it would be so strong that his iron rod could do no damage to it. He had used all of his strength in that attack, and it had unexpectedly done virtually nothing. Ah hey! With a roar, Tai Ta jumped forward and used his enormous strength to slash at the butt of the flaming cloud beast with his battle-axe. However, he didn't do any better than Jian Chen. Although his battle-axe had cut through the skin of the magical beast, it had done no damage at all. Their attacks had evidently angered the flaming cloud beast, because it roared in response. Whipping its head back and forth, it threw off Jian Chen, who had been standing on its head. As Jian Chen flew through the air, he quickly readjusted himself. Using both of his feet to jump off a tree trunk, he flipped himself upright onto a nearby tree branch. After throwing off Jian Chen, the flaming cloud beast turned around and tried to bite into Tai Ta. Tai Ta immediately leapt aside to avoid its mouth, and simultaneously swung his battle axe into one of the giant tusks. Ding! The battle axe smashed against the tusk, breaking it off near the root. However, after the tusk was broken off, Tai Ta's battle axe chipped off in several places as well. Ho! The flaming cloud beast roared in anger as it stampeded towards Tai Ta once more. Tai Ta's eyes flashed dangerously as it watched the flaming cloud beast charge towards him. Without bothering to dodge, Tai Ta dropped his battle axe onto the ground and used both of his hands to grab onto the remaining tusk and the root of the broken one, before pushing back at the monster, resulting in a deadlock. At that moment it was as if Tai Ta had turned into a fierce beast. Grunting out loud, his hands pushed against the flaming cloud beast's tusks, as if trying to compare his strength to it. Despite Tai Ta's heavenly strength, he was still a delicate tiny figure compared to the heavy and gigantic flaming cloud beast. So even though his own strength wasn't lacking, he found himself being pushed backwards a large distance, his feet leaving behind 2 deep marks in the ground. Ah! Tai Ta's eyes revealed a crazy look within them as he roared. The veins within his arms bulged as both of his arms swelled up in an instant, as he began to exert more force. Pa! Another crisp sound was heard as the remaining tusk was snapped off by Tai Ta, causing the flaming cloud beast to release a blood-curdling roar of pain. Despite having used a good amount of his strength, Tai Ta was not yet satisfied, as he grabbed onto the freshly broken-off tusk and used it to pierce it into the head of the flaming cloud beast. The tooth of the flaming cloud beast was extraordinarily sharp, and was far stronger than Jian Chen's weapon. But despite its sharpness, it had only penetrated into the head by a tiny amount, causing a small amount of blood to spurt outwards. Seeing Tai Ta use its own tusk to stab it, the flaming cloud beast's eyes grew extremely red as it opened its mouth wide. With a loud roar, it unleashed a trail of fire that moved around, almost like a serpent emerging from its gaping jaws, with the intention of roasting Tai Ta alive. Instantly, the surrounding temperature had started to increase exponentially. Sensing the astonishing heat radiate from the stream of fire, Tai Ta's expression immediately changed, as he desperately threw himself away from the attack. But despite his efforts he had not been able to dodge the attack of the fire serpent, and so his entire body caught on fire. Seeing Tai Ta's body catch on fire, Jian Chen turned pale with fright. Immediately snapping off a thick tree branch, he jumped off against a tree trunk and sped towards the Tai Ta like a speeding bullet. Ho! The flaming cloud beast roared once more as it stamped towards the still burning Tai Ta. Opening its jaws wide, it tried to swallow him, not caring if he was on fire or not. Just as the flaming cloud beast was about to consume Tai Ta, Jian Chen had finally reached Tai Ta. Using both of his arms, Jian Chen waved the tree branch in his hand to drag Tai Ta a good 10 meters away from the jaws of the magical beast. Jian Chen quickly dislodged Tai Ta from the branch and without caring for the fire's heat, he quickly extended his arms and tore away at the wolf leather Tai Ta was wearing. Because the fire had caught onto the fur of the wolf leather, the moment it was removed from him, Tai Ta was no longer on fire. Tai Ta's tattered academy uniform was exposed underneath. Tai Ta didn't bother to get up from the floor, but instead started to roll on the ground while complaining, "Hot, hot. I'm dying from the heat, it burns." Seeing him complain like that, Jian Chen deduced that Tai Ta had not suffered any major harm. However, all of his hair had been burnt off, leaving him bald. Not a single hair remained, even his eyebrows and eyelashes had been burnt away. Chapter 42, Roadside Robbery / Pete Tai Ta, are you alright? Jian Chen asked in concern. Tai Ta shook his head. He let out a long breath, and spoke in a muffled voice, "I'm fine, but the heat really got me, it was difficult to endure." "As long as you're fine." Jian Chen sighed in relief. When he saw that Tai Ta was engulfed in flames, Jian Chen had honestly felt quite concerned for Tai Ta's well-being. Suddenly, Jian Chen's eyes hardened as he turned back to look at the lush tree. His eyes gleamed as his mouth also rose up to show a hint of a smile. Hong! 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 The ground began to shake again as the flaming cloud beast stamped towards Jian Chen. With each step it took, the earth trembled. The flaming cloud beast kept breathing fire out of its mouth, almost as if it was excited. Tai Ta's face hardened as he stared at the approaching flaming cloud beast. Changyang Xiang Tian, this guy's skin is fairly tough. How do we go about killing him? Jian Chen also looked at the beast with a grave face. The flaming cloud beast's body is entirely covered by a strong layer of skin. Unless we reach the level of saints, our weapons will barely be able to slice apart its pelt. At the moment, our only chance is to attack through the flaming cloud beast's eyes to stab its brain. As Jian Chen trailed off, the flaming cloud beast roared, and opened up its jaws to release another serpent fire. Jian Chen and Tai Ta both dove towards the side to dodge it. Jian Chen tightly clenched the iron rod, as he cried out, Tai Ta, distract it for me. Don't worry, leave it to me. Tai Ta picked up a nearby rock and threw it at the flaming cloud beast, and ran towards the opposite direction. The rock twirled in midair before hitting the flaming cloud beast precisely on the spot where Tai Ta had broke off the tusk. Since the spot was still tender for the flaming cloud beast, its eyes turned red with bloodlust as it began to breath fire at Tai Ta once more. Jian Chen watched as Tai Ta distracted the flaming cloud beast. He gripped the iron rod so hard that it had begun to deform. Quickly running forward, he dashed towards the head of the flaming cloud beast. Jian Chen's speed was fairly fast. As he dashed across the ground, the grass around him swayed from the rapid air currents, which made him seem like he was flying. In a short moment, Jian Chen had reached the head of the flaming cloud beast. Not even caring for the intense heat from the streams of fire the beast was spitting out, he jumped into the air once more to land on the head of the beast. With the iron rod in his right hand, he quickly stabbed it into the eyes of the flaming cloud beast. Although Jian Chen had moved quickly, the flaming cloud beast wasn't slow to react either. Before the iron rod could pierce the eye, the beast suddenly shut its eyes. Jian Chen's eyes flashed for just a brief second as he saw the flaming cloud beast close its eyes. Focusing, Jian Chen condensed his soul and willed it to enter his iron rod. As it covered the sharp point of the iron rod, he tried to ram it into the eyelid of the flaming cloud beast. The iron rod then pierced through the eyelid with no difficulty or resistance. Immediately, blood came pouring out of the eye of the flaming cloud beast. Ho! The flaming cloud beast suddenly let loose a desolate cry that shook the heavens themselves, as it whirled and struck out randomly in all directions. Jian Chen exerted more pressure on his right arm, pushing the iron rod in even deeper in attempt to strike at the brain from the eyes. The flaming cloud beast's screams became more desolate as it started to sway back and forth. It attempted to remove the iron rod from its eye, but the rod had already sunk in far too deep, making it difficult to remove. As it shook its head to remove Jian Chen, the pain grew more intense. After 2 attempts at shaking its head, the pain was so fierce for the flaming cloud beast that it didn't dare to move at all anymore. Endlessly wailing in pain, the flaming cloud beast dropped to the ground, where it began its final struggle to fight. Although the wound wasn't fatal, the damage done to its cranial nerves was excruciatingly hard to bear. Seeing the flaming cloud beast fall to the ground, Jian Chen flashed in glee as he yelled, Tai Ta, quickly drive the iron rod deeper in. Given Tai Ta's heavenly strength, this task couldn't be more appropriate for anyone else. Alright, I'm on my way. Tai Ta cried out happily as he ran over, having now realized that victory was on hand. Tai Ta approached the flaming cloud beast quickly and grabbed the iron rod before pushing it 1 meter deeper into the eye of the flaming cloud beast with his right hand. Only a small portion of the rod was left sticking out. Ho! The loudest cry yet came out of the beast, causing Tai Ta and Jian Chen's ears to momentarily go deaf. With that, the flaming cloud beast expended the last of its energy and slumped onto the ground. It stopped twitching, and its other eye gradually closed. Seeing that the beast had finally died, Jian Chen and Tai Ta could not help but exhale in relief. The Class 2 magical beast Flaming Cloud Beast wasn't that amazing, but its defenses were extraordinarily high. Thus, killing it was an extremely difficult task. It finally died. This magical beast was too troublesome. It even breathed out fire and burnt away all my hair. Tai Ta touched his bald head with a depressed expression. Jian Chen could only laugh as he watched Tai Ta gloom over his hair and clothes. You should at the very least put something on, he said as he took out another wolf pelt from his space belt. The wolf pelts were something he and Tai Ta had prepared. There were many sets stored within their belts just in case they needed a new change of clothes. Because they were in a forest where battle was a common occurrence, a change of clothes could not be in high enough demand. Tai Ta took it without another word, and in a flash, he had transformed the pelt into wearable clothing. Afterwards, Jian Chen and Tai Ta extracted the monster core and continued on their way. After Jian Chen and Tai Ta disappeared from view, a red-clad figure dropped down from the trees. The figure was a tall woman, around 30 years old, clad in fiery red clothing. Her appearance was not extremely beautiful, yet she gave off a gentle, calm air. The woman stared at the carcass of the flaming cloud beast with astonishment written clearly on her face. Letting out a deep breath, the woman muttered to herself, Tai Ta and Changyang Xiang Tian, you two truly have well-deserved reputations. To think your strengths are this amazing, you two aren't even saints yet and you managed to use regular iron weapons to kill a Class 2 magical beast known for its defenses. I am truly awestruck, I must report this to the headmaster. After saying that, the woman immediately vanished into thin air. As soon as the woman disappeared, another 5 youths came into the clearing. Each of the 5's faces were covered by darkness, so their appearances couldn't be easily seen. However, their shabby academy uniforms could be seen as they held their weapons up. 2 held great swords while another held up a large axe. The last youth with a tall and sturdy body held his sledgehammer up as he followed the group. Judging from the sound, the cry came from this area. One of the great sword-wielding youths said to the rest. The axe-carrying student nodded his head, not bad, if the magical beast didn't run too far away, then it should still be in the vicinity. He trailed off as his eyes widened at the sight in front of him. You guys, look. What is that? He pointed. Hearing their friend, everyone's eyes drifted forward as they saw a mountain-like fiery red body lying on the ground that seemed to resemble a magical beast. Let's go look. In a flash, all 5 of them approached the body of the magical beast. However, after they recognized the magical beast, their faces all grew serious. The most experienced one amongst them got close to the body and touched the bloody fur with one hand before saying, "This is a flaming cloud beast. Its defenses are very high, but its attacks aren't all that strong. The blood hasn't dried yet and is still warm, so it must have just died. It would appear that the howl we heard earlier was from this." The sword youth looked around himself before looking at the direction of Jian Chen's footprints. Come, let's go follow those footsteps and see who exactly killed this flaming cloud beast. If their strength is good enough, we can add them to our group so we can easily hunt more beasts. But if they're weaker than us, a small smile started to creep up on his face. Hearing this, the other 4 youths all thought of the same thing, their faces revealing evil smiles. Soon after, the 5 of them immediately chased after Tai Ta and Jian Chen. At the moment, Jian Chen and Tai Ta were cautiously walking within the forest. In order to protect themselves from magical beasts as well as a few of the swamps on the ground, the 2 of them were not advancing very quickly. At that moment, Jian Chen's ears detected something. Holding his hand up to stop Tai Ta, he said, "Be careful, there's some people coming from behind us." Tai Ta immediately stopped moving and turned around in curiosity. In the blink of an eye, the people who had been following Jian Chen came into view. There was a total of 5 people, but Jian Chen couldn't see their faces since it was covered by the shade, but he could tell that they were strong from the amount of saint force they were emitting from their weapons. When the 5 saw Jian Chen and Tai Ta, they let loose happy smiles to each other, as if they had mutually agreed on something. Increasing their speeds, the 5 of them quickly reached and surrounded Jian Chen and Tai Ta. Seeing this development, both Tai Ta and Jian Chen felt a bad premonition within themselves. "Dear students, might I ask what you're doing?" Jian Chen asked. One of the youths brandished his sword with an evil smile. "You're asking us what we are doing. Hand over your space belts obediently. We definitely don't want to embarrass you, but if you don't comply, ha ha ha," the sledgehammer-wielding student sneered at them. Tai Ta's face grew angry as he heard the demand. "You want us to hand over the space belts? Humph, don't even think about it." Tai Ta understood what was going on now. This was a roadside robbery. Jian Chen patted the space belt on him gently with a smile. "The space belts with all our monster cores are inside. If you have the skill, come and get it then." Although they knew that all 5 of them were saints, neither Jian Chen nor Tai Ta felt a hint of fear. "Humph, since it came down to this, then don't blame us for this. Everyone, attack together." Immediately the 5 of them rushed forward to attack the 2, but their attacks were not aimed at fatal areas. The 5 clearly understood that they were still all students. Stealing was one thing, and so was fighting, but they were not allowed to fatally threaten the opposing party's lives. Chapter 43, Counter-Steal. Jian Chen and Tai Ta immediately dove to the side. After 2 days of relentlessly fighting magical beasts, even the thick-skulled Tai Ta had started to pick up battle experience. This paid off. As Tai Ta dodged the incoming attack, he instinctively swung his battle-axe at the leg of the assailant in a swift counterattack. However, the group in front of them was proving hard to deal with. Just as the battle-axe was about to hit one of them in the thigh, a sword flew out and hit the battle-axe with a colliding sound. Dang! Metal met metal, as Tai Ta's battle-axe was obstructed. Due to Tai Ta's terrifying strength, the battle-axe continued to slide down the blade of the sword before stopping at the hilt. Immediately, the youth holding the sword suddenly felt his entire arm go numb, as the battle-axe smashed itself against his arm, causing his whole hand to shake. The youth was astonished and cried out to his friends, "Everyone be careful, this guy's strength is abnormally strong. It's best if you don't get into arm's reach of him." Hearing the warning, the other 2 students fighting Tai Ta immediately became more cautious, and tried to avoid his giant battle-axe. On the side, Jian Chen was fighting intensely with the other youth holding a sword. Although Jian Chen's weapon was only a corroded iron rod, his fighting capabilities weren't any lower than Tai Ta's. He wasn't any weaker either, since he could easily use his agility to move around his opponent's moves. Seeing an opening, Jian Chen quickly stabbed his iron rod into the opponent's thigh with a lightning-fast speed. Since this was another student at the academy, he didn't dare to aim to kill, but instead aimed to injure. Jian Chen's speed was so fast that the student didn't have time to react, and could only watch in shock as the iron rod stabbed into his thigh. Ah! The youth cried out in pain as his face drained of color, and sweat dripped down his forehead. Hearing his companion cry out, the other sword wielder's face changed. Unable to fight Jian Chen personally, he cried out to his friend, "Harry, are you okay?" Although that youth wasn't attacking Jian Chen anymore, Jian Chen wasn't going to let him off that easily. As Jian Chen moved towards him, the Saint Force condensed into Jian Chen's fist as he suddenly punched the youth in the chest. Still moving at fast speeds, he refused to listen to the youth's complaints, or even wait for the youth to react. Jian Chen's palm struck out silently like a viper, and hit the other squarely on the chest. Pang! The youth was sent flying through the air from Jian Chen's fist, as blood came spurting out of his mouth. After dispatching the 2, he immediately went to go assist Tai Ta. At the moment, Tai Ta was embroiled in a tough battle, and had already taken damage from the 3 people. The wolf pelt he was wearing had already been slashed apart and ruined by the blood that was leaking from his wounds. If it weren't for his extremely durable body and godly strength, the others would not have been afraid to fight against him and knock him to the ground. With the appearance of Jian Chen, Tai Ta's pressure was alleviated by quite a bit. Jian Chen's strength in battle was extremely strong, and even normal saints wouldn't be able to fight him on equal footing. After a few seconds of close combat fighting against Jian Chen, the 3 that had surrounded Tai Ta had already started to lose. Each of them were sporting new injuries, and soon after, all 5 of them were writhing on the floor in pain, no longer having the energy to move. Jian Chen looked at the many wounds on Tai Ta, and asked with some concern, "Tai Ta, are you okay?" Tai Ta nodded his head and said, "I'm fine, my body's pretty tough." He pointed to the group of 5 people writhing on the ground. "What should we do with them?" Thinking about it, Jian Chen suddenly grew a strange smile on his face. "Tai Ta, go gather their space belts and take all of their monster cores before giving the belts back." Hearing Jian Chen, the 5 people on the ground went rigid as their faces paled. A few of them were growing red with indignation. The cores in their space belts were earned over the span of 2 days of constant struggles for their lives. Right now there was only half a day left until the 3rd day passed. If they were to lose all of their monster cores now, then they would definitely fail the mission. Tai Ta laughed. Without hesitation, he immediately followed Jian Chen's orders, and grabbed all 5 of the space belts from them. Jian Chen stared them down with the bloody iron rod in his hand, like a tiger watching his prey to prevent them from making any sudden movements. The 5 students originally had planned to fight back, but when they saw Jian Chen grip the bloody iron rod, they immediately gave up all thoughts about resisting, and obediently let Tai Ta take their space belts. After gathering all of the space belts, Tai Ta brought them back to Jian Chen and began to count the monster cores one by one. In total, they had only 12 monster cores, all of which were Class 2 monster cores. Jian Chen laughed as he grabbed 6 of the monster cores and put them in their own space belts before saying, "Tai Ta, let's split these in half, you get 6, I get 6. "All right." Tai Ta said as he placed his share into his own space belt. But when the 5 heard Tai Ta's name, all 5 of them went still, as their faces became unsightly to look at. When it came to his name, everyone in Kargath Academy had heard of him since he was the headmaster's apprentice. Although he wasn't a saint, when it came to the entire school, no one dared to mess with him. By this point, the 5 students started to regret their actions so much that their intestines became green. If they had known earlier that one of them was Tai Ta, then they wouldn't have tried to steal from the headmaster's apprentice no matter what. But now, not only were they robbed of what they were trying to steal, but they couldn't even get revenge now that they knew who he was. Their sufferings couldn't be summed up in words. Basically, they regret their actions so much they want to die. After storing all of the Class 2 monster cores, Tai Ta was smiling even brighter. "Changyang Xiang Tian, it's because you're so amazing and beat all 5 of them so quickly. I, Tai Ta, just can't compare to you at all." Jian Chen laughed and said, "All right, let's get back on the road now and hope we can kill a few more magical beasts for the sake of our cultivation." Soon after, Jian Chen and Tai Ta didn't see the paralyzed looks of the 5 students on the floor as they walked away. When the 2 disappeared into the forest, one of the youths started to curse out loud, "Fucking hell, what bad luck we have. To think we came across the apprentice of the headmaster and then failed the assignment. Not only that, but we had our monster cores stolen away from us without us being able to get revenge. Such wretched luck." The youth who had carried the sledgehammer earlier said in a hoarse voice, "That's not all of it, don't forget that it wasn't just Tai Ta who attacked us, there was another." Everyone's eyes lit up. "You're talking about Changyang Xiang Tian." The sledgehammer student nodded his head. "That's right, Tai Ta has the support of the headmaster, so we can't get revenge on him. But Changyang Xiang Tian doesn't have that same support. But Changyang Xiang Tian's strength is so strong though. The 5 of us couldn't beat him while he was alone, how would we ever beat him?" Another person asked. That's right, and the most important fact was that Changyang Xiang Tian was far too fast, we couldn't even dodge any of his attacks. One of the sword wielders said, it was the very same person who had his thigh pierced by Jian Chen. Then, the person with the axe opened his mouth suddenly. You guys forget that Changyang Xiang Tian already offended a lot of people at the academy like Lord Cheng and Master Luo, whose strength is higher than ours. If we can find an opportunity to join them, sooner or later we'll find a chance to strike at him. In the blink of an eye, the colors of the sky began to dim. The magical beasts in the third region were far less abundant than the ones in the second region. Half a day had passed, but Jian Chen and Tai Ta had only found a few magical beasts. Every time they encountered one, they experienced an arduous battle to kill it. Within that afternoon, the two of them had only gained another 7 Class 2 monster cores. Compared to their bounty in the second region, this number was clearly insignificant. But when they thought about how the 5 students who attacked them earlier had only gained 12 Class 2 monster cores in 2 days despite being saints, their hearts felt a bit more relieved. It was a lot more restless in the third region than the second, since the monsters were a lot harder to kill. Also, since the number of monsters were less, more people were willing to rob others for their cores. After Jian Chen and Tai Ta had fought against the 5 students from before, they had another 3 encounters with robbers. At the very least each group had 4 people in it and at the most a group had 7 of them. But in the end, they had overcome each challenge victorious, and took all of the monster cores from the other groups. But what had made Jian Chen depressed was that the group of 4 that attacked them earlier didn't have a single monster core, but the other 2 groups had a total of 33 Class 2 monster cores in the end. When night came, Jian Chen and Tai Ta sat down next to the fire as they roasted the meat of a magical beast. The two looked exhausted. Compared to the second region, the third region was far more tiring. At this point, Tai Ta's academy uniform was essentially gone. On his chest, his gains were showing. Only the most important part of his body was covered up by one of the extra wolf pelts, making him look like a savage. He was already covered with scars all over, and although they looked painful, they were only superficial wounds that didn't affect Tai Ta at all. This was a strong body that even Jian Chen looked at with jealousy. Jian Chen, on the other hand, was not faring much better. Although he still stuck with wearing his academy uniform, it had already been dyed red from blood, staining the clothes black after oxidizing. Suddenly, Jian Chen could hear the sounds of a distant battle. With his acute ears, he could hear the faintest of sounds. Jian Chen stood up from where he was sitting, and looked off to where he heard the sounds. Tai Ta, there's a fight going on over there. Chapter 44, Coincidental Meeting with Big Brother. Tai Ta didn't seem to care at all. I bet it's someone fighting against another magical beast. At first, Jian Chen thought so too, but the knowledge from his previous life had told him that these were the sounds of battle between people. In this environment, no matter what sound it was, Jian Chen was always on alert, especially since he had already been attacked by his fellow students multiple times earlier that day. Jian Chen had seen those older and more experienced students fall due to not always being on guard. Jian Chen didn't plan to end up like them. Straining his ears to hear the most minute of sounds, Jian Chen tried to catch the sounds he heard earlier. But as soon as he furrowed his eyebrows in thought, he heard the sound again. It wasn't the sound of a person fighting a magical beast, but of 2 people fighting each other. In addition, the sounds were getting closer. Jian Chen looked at Tai Ta and said, Tai Ta, that's not the sound of a person fighting against a magical beast, but of 2 people fighting each other. The sounds are getting louder and louder, so you should prepare yourself, we might end up fighting. Jian Chen didn't choose to change locations. With their current strength, they could easily protect themselves. In addition, he wasn't afraid of anything. Tai Ta immediately became interested as he grabbed his battle axe and asked, how many people do you think are fighting? Changyang Xiang Tian, do you think we should take a look? Jian Chen held the iron rod over the fire. No need, even without our interference, they'll be approaching us soon enough. Ah! Tai Ta sat back down after that with a look of serenity. Soon enough, the sounds of battle became louder and louder, to the point where even Tai Ta could hear it. A group of figures quickly came scurrying out from the bushes, and ran to where the bonfire was. Right behind them, a person wearing black flashed in, clearly chasing the other group. My two friends, the group behind wants to steal our monster core. Not only are they strong, but their numbers are greater than ours. I hope that we can combine forces and fight them off, otherwise, the hard work we had painstakingly earned over the last 2 days will be taken by them. One person shouted from a distance. Although Jian Chen and Tai Ta were only 2 people, if they joined them then they would be able to fairly go against the opposite party. Hearing that voice, Jian Chen's eyebrows knitted together. He felt that this voice was very familiar to him, as if he had heard it before. However, he couldn't place a name on the voice, clearly it hadn't left much of an impression. The 4 people that were running away were getting closer and closer to Jian Chen now. The person chasing them from behind suddenly sped forward and blocked off the 4 from moving forward anymore. Holding his giant sword up, he swung his sword at the ones who were still running. The one leading the team fought back with his own saint weapon to block against the sword. Dang! The 2 people had a huge difference in strength that could easily be seen, as the one who had blocked the attack was thrown backwards violently. With this distraction, the people chasing from behind had finally caught up and once more started to attack those who were trying to run away. There were 8 people that had come in pursuit, and all of them quite strong. The difference between their numbers only added to the pressure. Without reinforcements, the ones who were trying to run away would ultimately lose. Luo Jian, just wait there, I won't let you get away. One of the ones who were running away snarled. Hearing this, Jian Chen who was standing not too far away went rigid. The voice who spoke out was one he was familiar with, it was his older brother Changyang Hu. Big brother. Jian Chen cried out in astonishment. Immediately his face became one of shock, and without hesitation, he rushed on over with his iron rod in hand. Seeing Jian Chen move, Tai Ta began follow Jian Chen with his battle-axe in hand. For the past 3 days, Tai Ta had started to follow all of Jian Chen's commands without even realizing it. Over the course of the 3 days, Jian Chen's strength had been fully revealed. With his experience of surviving in the forest and his strategy, Tai Ta had been humbled by Jian Chen's talents. Flying across the ground, Jian Chen ran across the grass towards where the fight was taking place. His hands blurred as the iron rod flew through the air and pierced into one of the people his brother was fighting. He was relieved to hear that one of the people coming towards him was his older brother, Changyang Hu. Although everyone had noticed Jian Chen and Tai Ta, and were all cautiously guarded against the 2, Jian Chen had moved far too fast and without warning. In their limited lines of sight due to the darkness, no one had noticed to the iron rod in Jian Chen's hand. The pointed end of the iron rod stabbed into the Changyang Hu's attacker, causing him to scream out in pain into the night sky as he whirled around. Without waiting for the guy to react further, Jian Chen immediately brought his leg to his chest and kicked him away into the air. Ack! At this moment, Tai Ta also charged over. He swung his axe around, hacking away at the enemies, causing them to be batted away. But the person Tai Ta was swinging it wasn't slow to react either. Watching the axe come down on them, his face didn't reveal the smallest amount of fear, and instead, he brought his sword up to block the axe. Dang! Once the sword met the battle-axe, Tai Ta and the other were brought to a deadlock with a loud clang. Their weapons shook, Tai Ta remained where he stood, while the other person was forcibly sent flying backwards. With Tai Ta's godly strength, unless one was a giant, then she would stand no chance against Tai Ta. But the person who was fighting against him was no giant, and so he had taken a huge loss. However, even with that development, Tai Ta's battle-axe chipped once more. Although the difference in strength was huge, if Tai Ta had not enveloped his battle-axe with his own saint force, then the battle-axe would have long since been destroyed. Ah! Tai Ta let loose a snarl as he brandished his battle-axe. The group of robbers then dispatched another 2 people to face off against Tai Ta. Dang! After his clear clang, another person who didn't understand how strong Tai Ta was collided against him one more time. Immediately, he was launched into the air by Tai Ta's battle-axe, which caused his battle-axe to chip even more. Although Tai Ta's battle-axe was strong, it was far from being on the same level as a saint weapon, because every saint weapon had a great amount of energy within it. With a saint weapon, one could release an attack far stronger than normal blows. However, these people Jian Chen were fighting against were far too weak, and some of them were still at the primary levels of a saint. While Tai Ta could go toe-to-toe with those primary-leveled saints, his battle-axe had been through far too many collisions. Be careful, his strength is extraordinarily high, and watch out for his battle-axe. The one who was blown away from him yelled as a warning. Hearing his companion's warning, the remaining youth became extremely cautious. He dodged the battle-axe, and grabbed onto Tai Ta's space belt. Jian Chen was moving around with the speed of lightning. As his iron rod flashed this way and that. With his body moving like a spirit's, he fought alongside with Changyang Hu. Already dyed red with blood, the iron rod was concealed under the shade of the night, as if it was a viper. As he wandered about the area in the darkness, his iron rod shot out silently, in a silent manner that was difficult for his enemies to detect. Jian Chen was striking out with his iron rod so fast that even the person fighting Changyang Hu were not able to react in time, as his thighs were speared through with the iron rod. The person's face grimaced in pain as he let out a painful scream, and clenched his hands in reflex. Changyang Hu was not courteous enough to wait for him to simmer down, and immediately sliced at his opponent's left shoulder. Immediately, he cried out in pain again as his left arm was cut, the sword cutting the bone clean off, leaving his arm to be connected to his arm by a small amount of flesh. A torrent of blood came spurting out as he grabbed at it. A cyan-colored light illuminated the night as they all saw a giant sword appear and slash down towards Jian Chen. Wind attributed Saint Force. Seeing the cyan light envelop the sword, Jian Chen's own face hardened. He immediately used the profound steps and melted away into the air like a mirage. As soon as he had faded away, the cyan sword immediately slashed through at the spot where Jian Chen had just been standing. Jian Chen reappeared 3 meters away, not too far away. The person who had slashed at him stood arrogantly at the spot, wearing a raggedy academy uniform dyed red with blood. His face was covered by the night, so Jian Chen couldn't recognize him. Jian Chen's eyes focused on the group. He snorted and said in a low voice, "Luo Jian, I didn't think I would meet you here." The youth Jian Chen addressed was startled. He thought the voice was far too familiar, so he carefully stared at Jian Chen. Although it was nighttime, there was still a gleaming light in the sky that allowed him to see Jian Chen's face clearly. However, after 3 days of constant fighting in the forest, without any clear water, everyone's faces was jet black. It was impossible for people to see each other's appearances with ease. However, the nearby Changyang Hu heard the voice of Jian Chen, and his face became one of shock. He couldn't believe his eyes or ears. Your fourth brother." Changyang Hu was astonished. When it came to Jian Chen's voice, he was all too familiar with it. Luo Jian suddenly came to a realization as he laughed. "No wonder I thought your voice was familiar. So it was Changyang Xiang Tian after all. I didn't think you would break through to becoming a saint. I really am amazed at that." After saying that, his eyes flashed dangerously. Jian Chen turned around and faced Changyang Hu. "Big brother, we'll talk later. Right now, I'll remove the crisis in front of us. You go help the others, and leave Luo Jian to me." Chapter 45, Luo Jian's defeat. "All right then, you take care of yourself, fourth brother." Luo Jian's strength has already reached the middle-ranked saint level. Changyang Hu immediately went off to help his friends. Although seeing Jian Chen in the third region was unexpected, he knew that now wasn't the time to try to figure out how or why. Because Jian Chen and Tai Ta's sudden appearance, the originally disadvantaged Changyang Hu and his group were now on an even playing field. Moreover, because of Tai Ta's existence, the winds of battle were blowing in their favor. The playing field was now sloped towards them in a short amount of time. Looking at the Luo Jian's dark and swarthy face, Jian Chen laughed. "Luo Jian, it looks like your plan to steal our monster cores will end in failure, your monster cores will be given to us instead." Luo Jian's face grew angry as his eyes flashed dangerously. "Changyang Xiang Tian, you don't have the power to take away my monster cores." Jian Chen looked at Luo Jian with some disdain before saying, "Then let's test it out, let's see if I have the power to snatch away your monster cores or not." Jian Chen said nothing more after that, as his body started to sway before charging quickly at Luo Jian. His hand held the iron rod and struck like a viper towards Luo Jian's chest, using the darkness of the night as its cover. A flash of killing intent went through Luo Jian's eyes as he held his cyan-colored sword up. He brandished it in an imposing manner before slashing at Jian Chen. Since Luo Jian was not only a middle-ranked saint, but also had wind-attributed saint force, his attacks were even faster than before. So much that whenever he swung his blade an after-image would appear. Seeing the sword come down towards his head, Jian Chen dodged to the side, and continued to thrust the iron rod towards Luo Jian's chest. Luo Jian's face changed as he realized the speed the iron rod was traveling at was extremely high. At that critical moment, his sword was too far out to bring it back to protect himself, but his reaction speed wasn't too slow either. Reabsorbing the wind saint force into his body, he forced his body to move backwards and bring back his sword. Luo Jian's speed became faster. The moment Jian Chen's iron touched Luo Jian's clothes, he had already escaped from Jian Chen's range of attack. As soon as he had escaped Jian Chen's range, he immediately started to gather the saint force into his hands again to slash at Jian Chen again with the sword. Luo Jian's attack was fairly simple, but to Jian Chen's eyes, it was a mess of an attack. Not a single amount of technique or finesse was shown. However, Jian Chen still didn't dare to belittle it too much. Jian Chen leapt into the air to dodge Luo Jian's sword. Immediately springing off from a tree trunk, he flew towards Luo Jian, his arms shaking, causing a faint mirror image to appear behind him. Jian Chen's arm was already traveling at high speeds, and the iron rod was traveling at the speed of lightning towards Luo Jian, so even the naked eye wouldn't be able to see it. Luo Jian's eyes widened in realization as the iron rod had already reached him. This time Luo Jian was unable to defend himself from Jian Chen's attack, nor was he able to dodge in time, resulting in the iron rod piercing deeply into his chest. Luo Jian's face hardened as he stared at the impaled iron rod within him, a dumbfounded expression appearing on his face. Not only was there a tinge of disbelief on his face, but despair and fear as well. When the iron rod had pierced into him, he had been unable to mount any type of resistance against it. He had no defense, due to the iron rod being a lot faster in speed than he had been able to react to. Even if he was a wind attribute saint, the iron rod had still skewered straight through him, causing a fatal injury. What followed afterwards was beyond everyone's expectations. The moment Jian Chen's iron rod had pierced into Luo Jian's chest, everyone had stopped moving. Then, a pure amount of saint force transferred from the iron rod into Luo Jian's body. With the removal of the rod, the support disappeared, and Luo Jian dropped onto the ground. When Jian Chen had sent his saint force-infused soul into Luo Jian's body, it was as if his body had exploded. The energy rippled through Luo Jian's body like an energy wave, wreaking havoc within his organs. PFF. Luo Jian immediately spit out a mouthful of blood. The fierce pain he was feeling inside his body was strange and unknown to him. He let loose a blood-curdling scream as he rolled on the ground. Luo Jian's scream was abnormally desolate and immediately caught the attention of all those still fighting. However, as their eyes looked at the rolling Luo Jian, everyone except Tai Ta was stunned into silence. What they were watching caused them no small amount of shock, and many of them still couldn't believe their eyes. Even after finishing off Luo Jian, Jian Chen didn't consider letting the group of robbers go. Holding his iron rod as he stood in the middle, he thought that it was lucky that he had met his older brother Changyang Hu now. If he had met Changyang Hu later, then Jian Chen was afraid that his brother would have lost all of his monster cores to Luo Jian's group and been left with a heavy injury. With Jian Chen entering the battle, the opposition no longer had the upper hand. Although Jian Chen wasn't a saint like everyone else, he undoubtedly was the most powerful amongst everyone present. In his past life, Jian Chen was a traveling wanderer who had practiced the way of the sword, to the point where he had reached perfection with it. His moves were hard to detect since he moved so fast that it was inconceivable at some points. People who were relying on only their eyes wouldn't be able to see him. Since Jian Chen was only using an iron rod, his true strength could not be brought out. The opponents in front of him were mere students with little battle experience. With his extraordinary sword knowledge, he could quickly end the battle. Until the end of the fight, no one had realized that the weapon Jian Chen was using wasn't actually a saint weapon, but actually just a common iron rod. After the fight, all of the injured students that took part in the robbery sat down on the ground. Each one of them had a different type of wound on different spots, and they all looked at Jian Chen with terror. Looking at the 8 youths on the floor, although Changyang Hu and his team of 4 were heavily injured, they couldn't help but reveal the joy of victory while looking at Jian Chen with stares of respectful admiration. Changyang Hu, I didn't think you'd unexpectedly have such an amazingly strong fourth brother. His strength really leaves me astonished. That's right, Changyang Hu. Although we heard about your fourth brother's strength a long time ago, I didn't think that he was this amazing until now. Even the middle-level Saint Luo Jian was defeated by him. If it weren't for your fourth brother's help, I'm afraid that our group wouldn't have been able to protect the monster cores we worked so hard to get. The 3 youths and Changyang Hu had a decent relationship with each other. Each one of them sighed in joy as they excitedly discussed the recent events. At this moment, Jian Chen arrived by Changyang Hu's side and looked at his wounds. With some concern he asked, "Big brother, do you have any serious injuries?" Hearing this, Changyang Hu shook his head absent-mindedly. Looking at Jian Chen with joy and surprise, he replied, "I'm fine, just fine. It's only a small wound. Don't forget, your older brother has the Earth-attributed Saint Force, which improves my defenses by a lot." Changyang Hu paused for a bit and then asked, "That's right, fourth brother, how did you come across the third region? I remember that before we entered the forest, your strength was still before the saint level. Also, how did you become so amazing, for you to even defeat Luo Jian?" Changyang Hu asked curiously. Jian Chen laughed and said, "Big brother, this type of situation should be explained later over a nice and slow talk. Right now, we still have to take care of the problem in front of us." Jian Chen swept his gaze over at the several students who were on the ground. "Big brother, how do you think we should punish these guys?" Giving the question some thought, he said, "Fourth brother, this should be resolved by you. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid our group of 4 would have had all of our monster cores stolen." Jian Chen's face had a deep smile on it as he said, "In that case, there's no need to be merciful to them. At the very least, we should collect all of their monster cores from their space belts." Jian Chen's suggestion was quickly approved by everyone, and so under the poisonous and hateful glares of Luo Jian's group, they quickly grabbed all of the space belts and collected the monster cores inside. After checking their inventories, the 8 of them had a total of 130 monster cores. Seeing such a number, even Jian Chen was astonished by the amount. Changyang Hu exclaimed in admiration, "I didn't think that they would have this many monster cores. It looks like they robbed many people before us. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to kill so many monsters in a span of 3 days with their strength." Jian Chen nodded his head in approval before saying, "Big brother, let's split the cores into 6 parts so that we each get an equal share." "That's no good." Jian Chen turned towards the new speaker, a youth from Changyang Hu's team, Changyang Xiang Tian, the only reason we were able to obtain these monster cores was because of you and your fellow comrade here. We didn't do anything at all, so you shouldn't split the cores with us and keep it among the two of you. The student's suggestion was quickly approved by the other two students. One of them immediately said, Oz is right. Changyang Xiang Tian, if it weren't for you and your friend, the strength of US4 wouldn't have been enough to win. I'm afraid we wouldn't have even been able to protect our own monster cores. But now that our monster cores are safe from their grasp, we are satisfied. The monster cores you got from Luo Jian and his friends are something we don't want. Right, Changyang Xiang Tian, you were able to get these monster cores with the combined strength of you and your friend. How could we be shameless enough to divide this up? Jian Chen's eyes flickered with a bright glow as he looked at their faces, searching for any signs of falsity. However, he could only see sincere honesty, with absolutely no traces of dishonesty. His respect for the three grew tremendously, but he truly did admire his older brother the most. He didn't think his older brother would be able to find three friends with such good personalities like this. Although Changyang Hu had the body and brain of a tiger, Jian Chen understood that his brother was not at all stupid. Jian Chen laughed and said, everyone had contributed to this situation. If it weren't for you guys stalling them, if they had somehow joined forces with Luo Jian to attack me, I'm afraid that I would have lost then. Let's go with this, Tai Ta and I will take half of the monster cores, and you guys will take the rest and divide it amongst yourselves. That should be fine, right? Chapter 46, Rich Prophet, what fourth brother said is correct. This was something we all worked hard to do, so let's follow fourth brother's idea and split the monster cores. Half of it will be given to fourth brother and his other friend here. The other half will be equally split among the four of us. Changyang Hu laughed. He and Jian Chen were blood brothers, even though they had different mothers, it did not affect the relationship between them. He would not be stingy with him. With Changyang Hu deciding for them, the other three students couldn't decline any more and took the monster cores excitedly. After splitting it up, each of the four had gotten at least a dozen, bringing them no small amount of excitement. With this amount, it was more than what they had gotten by themselves after last couple of days. After this event, no one had any plans to stay put anymore, and after changing their location, they began to start a new fire to roast some meat. The 6 people sat in a circle around the fire as Changyang Hu laughed, fourth brother, let me introduce you to everyone. These 3 are my best friends, Oz, Aoba, and Darien. He pointed at the 3, fourth brother, Oz and Aoba are identical twins. I guarantee that when they wash the filth on their faces off, you won't be able to tell who is who. Jian Chen smiled and greeted the 3 one by one. After chatting for a while, they had started to get so familiar with each other that even Tai Ta's name was known by them. Suddenly, Changyang Hu's face went still as he asked, fourth brother, I remember that before you went into the forest, your strength wasn't at the saint level yet. So why is it you're in the 3rd region? And now being so strong, you were even able to defeat the middle-ranked Wind Saint Luo Jian. Could it be that in the 3 days you were in the forest, you broke through? Changyang Hu's 3 friends paid close attention to this question. Both Darien and the twins became interested after hearing Changyang Hu's question, and shifted their attention to Jian Chen. Jian Chen beating Luo Jian had a huge impact on those 3. Although they had long since heard the rumors that were circulating throughout the academy that he was strong, the rumors didn't exaggerate his strength to this extent. Jian Chen laughed and held his iron rod up towards Changyang Hu, big brother, look. If I were a saint, would I still be using a weapon like this? Changyang Hu looked up and down the iron rod, but it looked the same. He had already recognized the blood-stained iron rod in Jian Chen's hands and it was still a normal rusty broken iron rod. That's, Changyang Hu's eyes went wide. He was put in a state of silent shock as he would have never in a million years thought that Jian Chen would be able to defeat Luo Jian using only a rusty iron rod, and if this didn't happen before his very own eyes, he wouldn't have believed it even if he was beaten to death. At the same time, Darien and the twins looked at the iron rod in Changyanghu's hands. The three of them were in disbelief, and then looked at Jian Chen as if he was a monster. Seeing the incredulous looks on their faces, Jian Chen laughed and said, "With the combined powers of me and Tai Ta, there were no magical beasts that were a match for us in the second region, so we decided to move on to the third region." Hearing this, Changyanghu and the other three couldn't believe their ears. The second region was filled with Class 1 magical beasts. Although they were weaker and had low attack power, even the average saint would find surviving in the forest a difficult task, and Jian Chen was still obviously not a saint yet. To say the second region was no longer a challenge, even Changyanghu and his friends would curse Jian Chen's absurd strength. After a while, Changyanghu and his friends finally recovered their senses. Changyanghu continued to ask, "Fourth brother, you're not even a saint yet and you're already this amazing. When the day comes and you become a saint, I really can't guess how much stronger you'll become." Changyanghu shook his head in awe. "All right, fourth brother, when do you think you'll become a saint?" Muttering more to himself, "I'm currently at the peak of the 10th layer. After this forest exercise, I'll aim to become a saint." Changyanghu let out a breath of air in surprise and shock as he looked at Jian Chen. "Fourth brother, you're simply too amazing for words. Not even a few months ago, you were a new student at Kargath Academy who was only at the 8th layer. I didn't think that you would reach the peak of the 10th layer in such a short amount of time." Hearing this, Darien and the twins couldn't believe it and their view of Jian Chen completely changed. The strength Jian Chen had shown was ridiculous, his cultivation speed was fast, and could border the line of the unimaginable. Jian Chen was definitely a genius among geniuses. At this moment, the three friends of Changyanghu quickly came to a decision that, in the future, they would have to treat him well and avoid offending him. Jian Chen laughed carefreely. "Big brother, I've noticed that within the third region, many people are resorting to stealing monster cores from others. How did this happen?" Changyanghu exhaled before saying, "I don't know who started this myself, but it's said that during the second day, someone started to steal monster cores relying on the fact that he had an enormous amount of people behind him. After this news spread, everyone in the third region started to follow suit, forming groups to rob cores. After all, Class 2 magical beasts are rare in comparison to Class 1 magical beasts, and are even harder to kill. Killing one beast would only get you one, but stealing from another is much easier than hunting, and with good luck, one would get a lot of cores as well. So up until now, all the students started to steal from each other in the third region. Many people have had their hard-earned monster cores stolen away from them when they were alone or were smaller in numbers. The people who were injured decided to quit early, reducing the numbers in the area drastically. Why don't the teachers that are secretly hidden care about what was happening?" Tai Ta asked. "As long as it isn't a life-threatening injury or a critical point between life or death, then the hidden teachers won't show up. After all, the reason why we are in the forest hunting magical beasts is so we can temper ourselves, not to mention that we are being tested on how we can unite when being robbed. Things like this happen often in the Tianyuan continent. They're only letting us experience this sooner rather than later," said the twins. "Ah!" Tai Ta suddenly exclaimed in realization. Jian Chen let loose a strange smile as he looked at his older brother and his friends. "Since other people have the audacity to rob us of our monster cores, why can't we rob them first? Are you guys with me on this?" The group's eyes went bright as they heard Jian Chen. "Fine, we'll do it. Changyang Xiang Tian, we will follow you," Darien said as he stood up and stared at Jian Chen, the heroic spirit reflected in his voice. "Not bad, before our strength was lacking, and could only run away blindly. But now that Jian Chen is here, even if we meet a middle-rank saint, victory isn't impossible. Since this is the final night, let's have some fun with this." Aoba and Oz laughed. "Alright, fourth brother, your big brother will listen to you," Changyanghu said happily. Tai Ta didn't have an opinion, as he had decided to follow Jian Chen without question for a while now. After everyone had eaten their fill and discussed their plans, they decided to let the twins search the surroundings for targets, while the rest waited for their return. The twins soon came back and reported that they saw a group of 5 people nearby. Jian Chen immediately followed the twins towards where they had reported seeing them. When Jian Chen's group had reached the place, the 5 people were preparing themselves to rest and were caught unprepared by Jian Chen's sudden attack. Since the group was only at the primary saint level, they were quickly defeated by Jian Chen and his group. However, they didn't have that many monster cores, only having around 20 or so. After taking the monster cores, they didn't continue to harass them and immediately left the area. For the entire night, Jian Chen and the others didn't sleep at all. Instead, they looked around the forest for more targets. There weren't many people in the 3rd region by now, and ever since he had started his search, he had only come across 3 different groups. But what he and the others found amusing was that halfway through the night, Jian Chen's group had came across another group who had the same idea they had, and so they had immediately started to fight. Both sides had 6 people each, and the other group even had 2 middle saints whose strength could be considered pretty strong. However, those 2 ended up being stuck against Jian Chen and Tai Ta. In the end, Jian Chen had come out victorious against his opponent, and gained 150 Class 2 monster cores as a reward. It would seem that many people had had their monster cores taken by this group. After the 3rd battle, aside from Jian Chen, everyone else was exhausted and could not continue fighting anymore. With no other choice, they spent the rest of the night searching for a secret place to hide and sleep. Although Jian Chen and Tai Ta had wanted to continue, the other 4 weren't in any shape to, and needed the 2 of them to stay behind and protect them against any surprise attacks. Without saying, Jian Chen and the group had had an overwhelming harvest. Excluding the first group with their 20 monster cores, the other 2 groups had 70 cores and 150 cores respectively. So in total, they now had 260 cores. Seeing this many monster cores, Jian Chen was starting to suspect that this was already half of the total amount of Class 2 monster cores in the 3rd region. The night passed peacefully, and the group started to travel towards the outside of the forest. With some herbal medicine, Changyang Hu and the others' wounds were starting to heal slowly. Back when they had first entered the forest, the school administration had already prepared these medicines inside of their space belts. At the moment, Changyang Hu and his friends were all wearing well-made wolf pelts that made them look as if they had no injuries at all. The wolf pelts were the ones that Jian Chen and Tai Ta had made from when they had slaughtered that pack of wolves. They had collected quite a large amount of them. Chapter 47, Returning to the academy. The group of 6 headed to the edge of the forest, now that they had completed their 3 days. If they could protect the monster cores until they reached the outside, then they would be able to finish the assignment perfectly. And since the academy would not take the cores, they would be able to use it for themselves. Traveling on the road, Jian Chen and the rest were very cautious. This was the crucial moment, since they could be ambushed at any given time. Jian Chen and Tai Ta were still full of life, but Changyang Hu and the others were not in the best shape. If they were to be attacked by another strong group, then a fierce battle wouldn't be avoidable, which was what Jian Chen wanted to avoid. Jian Chen walked down the road with Tai Ta behind him while the rest followed in a straight line as they reached to the part of the forest where the white enchantments of the forest rippled outwards. With the end of the 3rd day, the enchantment had suddenly transformed to help the students who were lost to find their way here. Jian Chen's soul was lashing out around him as he checked his surroundings. The 3rd region was not as quiet as the 2nd region. Not only did they have to protect themselves from magical beasts, but they also had to protect themselves from other students. Other students were waiting around for the perfect moment to strike. So because of that, the closer one got to the entrance, the more dangerous it became. After all, the enchantment was showing a hole in itself to help lead students out, so many of them were trying to leave the forest and made themselves an open target for those other students waiting to ambush them. A few hours passed, Jian Chen and Tai Ta were getting closer and closer to the third region's exit. The whole journey had been fairly peaceful, although at regular intervals, they'd encounter a magical beast carcass. Sometimes, there would even be 2 to 3 magical beast corpses lying in the same location. A few hours of rushing later, Jian Chen's group of people finally arrived outside of the third region's exit. They smoothly passed through and entered the second region. At this moment, everyone could not help but sigh in relief. They all understood that their monster cores were secured, because after leaving the third region, no matter whether or not others had gathered the required 2 monster cores, their task was complete. There was nobody here that would dare to steal their monster cores. I hadn't imagined that the journey would be so peaceful. This was really against my expectations. Changyang who happily smiled, his tone also carrying a hint of excitement. Aoba also happily said, "That's right, and here I'd thought that we'd fall victim to some surprise attacks. I didn't think that the path would have been so calm. It really goes against all expectations." Darien reached his hand out to touch his space belt and smiled. I guess the people stealing monster cores in the third region had suffered from injuries, and didn't have the energy to keep stealing from others on the road. In addition, most of the people probably have the same mindset as us, only stressing self-defense. As long as we safely leave the third region, we'll be satisfied. None of us are interested in the idea of stealing monster cores anymore. Yeah, that's right. What you said makes sense. Tai Ta nodded in agreement. Jian Chen shook his head and said, "The situation is not necessarily as you think it is. Actually, throughout the whole journey, there were still some people lying in wait along the way in hidden places ready to ambush us, you guys just didn't notice them. Those people who were hiding in the darkness perhaps noticed that we have a large number of people, or they didn't have the ability to discern our strength, so they couldn't determine if they could destroy us. That's why they didn't make any movements towards us. Otherwise, there's no way we could have safely left the third region." Hearing this, the people's expressions all changed. Changyang who let out a long breath and said, "It's a good thing fourth brother made sure we put on perfect acts of being completely undamaged. Otherwise, if the people knew that the 4 of us were injured, then I'm afraid we wouldn't have been so fortunate." Hearing this, Aoba and the others nodded in agreement, and looked at Jian Chen with gazes filled with respect. "Alright, we should hurry up and leave. After we return back to the academy, you guys need to properly tend to your wounds." The group of 6 continued to walk towards the first region. As they got closer to the exit, the nearby academy gradually entered their lines of vision. Although there were definitely many people that had been unable to endure the task and gave up on it in the middle, at least 1,000 people had entered the forest together. Even if more than half had given up, there were still at least a few hundreds of people remaining. However, the mere hundreds of people spread out in the enormous forest rarely met each other, so it was rare to come across others that had decided to remain in the forest. Jian Chen's gaze swept across the people around him that were similarly heading out of the first region towards the academy. He saw that most of the males sported naked torsos, and were covered with wounds. However, without any exception, all the people were in sorry states, their naked torsos were covered with dirt, and their faces could not be discerned with all the filth covering them. Only some of the females still wore the academy uniforms. However, every single one of the uniforms had become beyond dirty, and there were tears all over the clothing. Even a beggar's clothing was better than theirs. In addition, they used wide leaves to cover the parts that their clothes didn't, making them look like extremely sorry figures. Amongst all the people, there were also a few people who had serious leg injuries, rendering them unable to walk. They were being supported by their companions the whole way, and approached the outside of the forest, one step after another. Perhaps it was because there were so many people present here, but there were absolutely no magical beasts in the vicinity. It was even safer than before. Soon after, Jian Chen's group followed the direction the enchantment in the sky pointed to in order to exit the first region, and they finally exited the forest. Outside stood the vice headmaster, Chang Baiyan, wearing a white changpao, his back straight. Behind him stood a few teachers with indifferent expressions. Further behind them was a large group of nearly 1,000 Kargath Academy students. They were split into two groups. The group on the right had many more times people than the other group. Among them, some people were wearing academy uniforms that were dirty, but had very few tears. On the whole, they seemed to be in excellent and undamaged conditions. The other group of people seemed to be in a more difficult situation. Their uniforms were all tattered, and sported quite a few bloodstains as well. Underneath the multiple rips on their clothes, it could clearly be seen that they sported many scars on their bodies. The people in the left group only had around 200 people. All of them were in sorry states. Majority of the people there were wearing clothes made of bark or beast skins, and there were quite a few people that had naked torsos. However, all the people that walked out of the forest were organized by a teacher to join the group on the left. Afterwards, Jian Chen's group sat on the grass quietly in wait. By this point, he had already understood that all the people in the left group were those that had stayed in the forest for the entire 3 days, and had just left the forest today. On the other hand, the people in the right group were all those that had escaped before the 3 days were up. According to the Academy's regulations, no matter whether or not they had fulfilled the requirement of obtaining 2 monster cores, they still had failed their tasks. As he swept his gaze in a circle, Jian Chen discovered that many people in the group he was with had melancholic expressions. There were others that looked at certain people with looks of deep hatred, looking like they would spit out flames from their eyes. At that moment, Jian Chen sensed something. He turned around to look behind him, and saw 2 people with dirty faces and wearing clothing made of beast skins supporting a student in similar attire. The 2 were currently glaring at Jian Chen with poisonous hatred, as if burning him into a crisp with their gazes alone. A strong killing intent. After Jian Chen closely examined the people, his mouth formed a hint of a sneer. He already recognized that the person was actually Luo Jian. Although Jian Chen knew that after what happened the previous night, he had definitely wronged Luo Jian, Jian Chen didn't pay much mind to it. In terms of strength, he wasn't below Luo Jian at all. Once he was able to condense a saint weapon and become a saint, Luo Jian would no longer pose any threat to him. In terms of family backgrounds, although Jian Chen wasn't completely sure of Changyang clan's strength, they were in no means weak in any sort of aspect. Luo Jian was the son of the leader of a major powerful clan in Forbidden City, but in Jian Chen's opinion, there was no way the Luo clan would bother harassing him over such a trivial matter. After all, Luo Jian had only been injured by Jian Chen because of the training event that the academy had sent them on. In addition, the situation at that time had been because Luo Jian had first attacked his older brother's group. Afterwards, once all the people had walked out of the forest, Jian Chen's group had already increased to 300 to 400 people. At this moment, the vice headmaster Chang Bai-en walked up to the front of the crowd. He looked around at the group of figures that had obviously suffered through difficult situations. He smiled, and loudly said, "Very good. As expected, none of you have disappointed me. I hadn't imagined that this event to hunt magical beasts and stay in the forest for 3 days would have more people remaining this time compared to all the previous times this event has been held. Now, I want everyone to maintain their current formations, and begin walking back towards the academy." Afterwards, the entire 2 groups maintained their exact formations and quickly advanced towards the academy. In the middle of the journey, when they encountered a small river, everyone stopped to wash their faces clean, and then continued forward. Very soon, the group of students began to approach the academy, and in the distance, they noticed that a tall platform had been erected in the center of the sports field. The group of people stopped in front of the platform, and the vice headmaster Chang Bai-en, as well as a few teachers, walked up to it. The vice headmaster sat in the chairperson's place with a straightforward and imposing manner, and calmly said, "The magical beast hunting competition occurring once every 3 years has now officially ended. According to the Academy's regulations, after the task has been completed, we will now hand out awards. I would like to now invite all the people who had stayed in the forest for the entire 3 days and have gathered 2 monster cores to simultaneously step forwards. As soon as the vice headmaster finished speaking, 100 or so people immediately walked out of the crowd. I will now first count the Class 1 monster cores. Students who have hunted Class 1 magical beasts, please come up to the platform for the number of monster cores in your possession to be counted. The vice headmaster continued. Following this, all the students that had killed Class 1 magical beasts, including Jian Chen and Tai Ta, all walked up to the platform. There stood a teacher specifically assigned to count and record the number of monster cores that the students had earned. Chapter 48, Mu Tian. Among the 100 or so people, the majority of them were below the saint level, and had performed the event in the second region. When the students that had Class 1 monster cores walked up, only a bit over 30 people remained. This made the students who did not know much about the third region's conditions puzzled. Although the third region had Class 2 magical beasts, they all had low attack powers. To a saint that could condense a saint weapon, although it may not be possible for him, her to fight against the magical beast alone, as long as a few people work together, hunting magical beasts within the third region shouldn't be very difficult to do. It should definitely be easier than a student that had not yet reached saint level killing a Class 1 magical beast. After all, the saint weapons that saints had were extremely powerful, and far surpassed those other ordinary weapons. Logically, the chances of students completing their task in the third region should definitely be much higher than those in the second region. However, nobody had imagined that the event would end up with such results. In the third region, only a pathetic 30 or so students had completed their task. This was much less than the people who had finished in the second region. When the first student arrived in front of the teacher inspecting the monster cores, he directly reached into his space belt and lightly placed all of his monster cores on the table. This student only took out 3 monster cores total. Casually gazing at the 3 Class 1 monster cores, the approximately 50-year-old teacher in charge of inspecting the monster cores nodded and said, not bad. You qualify as passing. What's your name? Teacher, my name is Qing Yunfeng. The youth that was being inspected excitedly said. The 2 words, not bad, had already confirmed the fact that the teacher was praising him. Being complimented by the teacher was the greatest honor to him. The teacher picked up his pen and recorded the information on a piece of paper, then said, go return your space belt to the academy. Take your monster cores. Also, this is a badge that represents your glory. You must take good care of it. The teacher pulled out a badge from underneath the table, and handed it to the student. The student happily agreed. He carefully and tenderly took the badge, and then he walked off the platform in extremely high spirits. Next. Afterwards, students walked up in succession and handed their monster cores to the teacher for appraisal, and at the same time, were recorded. The process was quite fast, and in the blink of an eye, dozens of people had already passed. The fewest number of monster cores among them so far had been 2, and the greatest number had taken out 8, which had made the appraising elder shocked for a moment. At this moment, a handsome youth with an uncommon air walked up to get his monster cores inspected. The youth had a small scar on his forehead, and it was most likely a recent wound from the forest, since the scar still had a hint of blood on it. The youth calmly walked up to the elder, and quietly took off his space belt. He then began to take out monster cores, and placed them on the table one by one. As he was removing them, the table was soon filled with 6 Class 1 monster cores, yet he showed no signs of stopping. He continued to leisurely pull out monster core after monster core from his space belt. His movements were not at all rushed, and the expression on his face was indifferent, giving off the impression that he was a very steadfast person. When the youth first took out 6 monster cores, the inspecting teacher finally returned to his senses. A smile slowly formed on his face, and he lightly nodded while looking at the youth with an expression of admiration. Soon, the youth had already pulled out 10 monster cores. At this moment, the expression of the elder inspecting the monster cores finally changed. His gaze towards the youth was no longer one of admiration, but one of shock. For a person that had not yet reached saint level to have managed to kill and retrieve monster cores from 10 Class 1 magical beasts was definitely not an easy task. In addition, the youth still showed no signs of stopping, signifying to everyone present that he still had not finished removing all of the monster cores from his space belt. The students lined up being this youth had already been shocked speechless at the sight of him pulling out so many monster cores. They thought back to how much energy they had consumed in the forest just to retrieve 2 to 3 monster cores. To them, this had already been quite an amazing achievement. Many of them had even felt quite proud of this. Yet the youth in front of them had pulled out many times more monster cores than they had received within the last 3 days in a single breath. How could they not be shocked? Having fought against the Class 1 magical beasts quite a few times, they had been left with a deep realization that without reaching saint level, using an iron weapon to kill Class 1 magical beasts with such thick skin was extremely difficult. The youth did not pay any mind to the onlookers' expressions, as if he didn't see them. His movements had still not stopped, and he continued to pull out monster cores from his space belt one after another without a pause. Soon, there were already 15 monster cores piled onto the table, yet the youth still didn't show the slightest trace of stopping. He was still equally unhurried as before, and he very calmly continued to take out more monster cores from his space belt. At this moment, all the teachers on the platform were gazing at the youth in shock and disbelief. For a person not yet a saint to have killed more than 10 magical beasts within 3 days would perhaps be possible if he worked together with 5 to 6 people, but to have hunted so many magical beasts in 3 days alone was really something the teachers felt was impossible, unless those magical beasts were all seriously wounded. Sitting on top of the platform, the vice headmaster Chang Bai-en smiled and said, "His name seems to be Mu Tian. He only entered the academy last year. After only a single year, he went from the 8th Saint Force layer to the peak of the 10th layer. This speed is quite good." It said that he even tried to attack a saint. Although he ultimately failed, it has to be admitted that the Mu clan really did send a good young successor this time. The vice headmaster Chang Bai-en paused for a bit, then shifted his gaze towards the lined-up Changyang Xiang Tian and Tai Ta and muttered, "I really anticipate Changyang Xiang Tian's and Tai Ta's harvests." It said that the two of them had actually ran to the 3rd region to hunt Class 2 magical beasts on the last day. Their powers are clearly not at the saint level yet. Heavens, to have relied on iron weapons to hunt Class 2 magical beasts, that is really too unfathomable. If I hadn't personally witnessed the two of them kill a completely undamaged Class 2 magical beast, I would not dare to believe that such a situation was true. It seems that not only did the headmaster accept a good apprentice, Lore City's Changyang clan which has been silent for so long will soon return to their former glory because of Changyang Xiang Tian in the near future. Only after the youth had taken out 23 Class 1 monster cores did he finally stop. He calmly looked at the inspecting elder taking notes, and said, "Teacher, these are the monster cores I retrieved." The elder in charge of the inspection swept a glance at the 23 monster cores and let out a long breath. He looked at the youth with bright eyes full of emotions and asked, "What's your name?" "Mu Tian." The youth replied in an indifferent tone. The elder's gaze gradually became more serious as he continued to ask, "Mu Tian, did you gain these monster cores by yourself, or did you work together with others for them?" Mu Tian's expression did not change, as he had long since expected this would happen. "Teacher, these monster cores were gained by my hard work alone." Hearing this, the elder's expression immediately changed. He looked intensely at Mu Tian with an expression beyond admiration, then smiled and nodded, "Good. Good. Good. Mu Tian, right? Very good. Your results are extremely outstanding. I hope that you continue to work hard in the future." The elder did not ask how Mu Tian had gained the 23 monster cores, that was not important at all. The important part was that he knew that these monster cores had been gained through Mu Tian's hard work alone. After all, in the Tian Yuan continent, strength represented everything. As long as one could achieve the final victory, no matter what kind of dishonest methods were used, nobody would say anything about it. Hearing the elder's words of praise, Mu Tian could not help but smile. At that moment, the elder took about a sky blue belt and badge. He handed them over to Mu Tian and said, "This is a space belt you had previously given us, and this is your badge. Take proper care of them." Mu Tian calmly accepted the space belt and the badge of glory, and reinserted the 23 monster cores into his space belt, before walking off the platform. From beginning to end, Mu Tian had not shown a single trace of arrogance or pride, he always had the same, indifferent expression. Jian Chen's gaze followed Mu Tian until he walked off the platform. In his heart, he had already committed Mu Tian's name to memory. Based on his intuition, he felt that Mu Tian was probably quite a complex person, and hadn't used his full potential yet either. In the future, he would definitely accomplish much more, it was simply still unknown which of the two paths he would choose to advance on. Because Mu Tian had taken out over 20 monster cores, the following students didn't induce any type of reactions when they removed their monster cores. Majority of them had only the minimum 2 monster cores, the number of people that had more than 2 was very few. Aside from Mu Tian's 23 monster cores, the highest harvest had been the previous 8 monster cores. The inspection went by quickly, and it was soon Jian Chen's turn. At this moment, the gazes of the vice headmaster sitting in the chairperson's seat, as well as a few other teachers, immediately lit up. Their eyes closely followed Jian Chen, showing expressions of extreme concentration. The vice headmaster Chang Bai-en, who had previously been reclining in his seat, could not help but straighten his back, as he gazed at Jian Chen, full of expectations. Although he knew that Jian Chen had killed quite a few magical beasts in the forest, he didn't know the exact numerical value of this, quite a few. Jian Chen calmly walked up to the elder in charge of inspecting the monster cores and lowered his head to look at the 2-meter-long table. A troubled expression showed on his face, and after some hesitation, he said, "Teacher, can you please change to a larger table?" "Huh?" Hearing Jian Chen's words, the elderly man who was closely inspecting paused, and asked in confusion, "What did you just say?" Seeing that the table was originally not very large, and that there were already some items of little value on top of it, Jian Chen could only show a helpless expression. This table was really too small, there was absolutely no way he could fit all of his monster cores that pretty much completely filled his space belt. "Yes, teacher. Can I please ask you to change this table to a slightly larger one? This table is too small." Jian Chen continued. Chapter 49, The shock. Hearing Jian Chen's words, all the students lined up behind him, aside from Tai Ta, showed expressions of shock. They all gave extremely strange looks at Jian Chen, and quite a few suspected that they had heard him wrong. In their opinion, if you needed to hand over your monster cores, then just hand them over. Why would you bother caring about how large the table being used was? Wasn't this simply asking for trouble? Who is that person? He's really reckless, to even ask the teacher to change tables. He's really an idiot, to dare tell Teacher Steve that the table was too small in front of so many people. The most unfathomable thing is that he wants Teacher Steve to change tables for him. Heavens, for him to confront Teacher Steve about the table being used, does he not know that Teacher Steve is the strictest teacher in all of Kargath Academy? Quite a few people began to point at Jian Chen in discussion, looking at him as if he was an idiot. The inspecting elder's expression changed, as he furrowed his brows and stared severely at Jian Chen. He snorted and then in a low voice said, "What's your name? You even tried to confront a teacher like this table was prepared ages ago. It's not something that can be changed just because you said it should be changed." Jian Chen's words not only irritated the inspecting teacher, even a few of the teachers judging from the back could not help but knit their brows as they looked at Jian Chen with displeased expressions. Jian Chen's words were completely disrespectful to them as teachers. Not a single one of the people even considered the fact that Jian Chen had requested for change in tables because the current table had no way of fitting all the monster cores inside his space belt. Of course, there were some teachers who were exceptions. Their demeanors were still very calm. Their faces only showed a light trace of a smile. These few were the ones who watched Jian Chen and Tai Ta viciously kill a group of blue wolf kings. At this time behind them, a beautiful girl with a pair of bright eyes stared suspiciously at Jian Chen's figure, frowning in deep thought and whispering softly, "Strange. Why do I feel that his shadow is a little familiar? Maybe I've met him somewhere." The girl's eyebrows furrowed as she thought hard. Suddenly, her eyes flashed, and a familiar figure appeared in her mind. The next moment, her eyes exposed a look of surprise accompanied by a magical color. She unconsciously shouted, "Changyang Xiang Tian, he is Changyang Xiang Tian." The girl's voice was not concealed at all, so many people heard her. The moment everyone heard the name Changyang Xiang Tian, their faces started to change as the students who had been recklessly hurling insults Changyang Xiang Tian started to shut their mouths like obedient children. Changyang Xiang Tian was a name that was prominent throughout Kargath Academy and was practically heard of by everyone. However, not many people had actually seen what he looked like, most of who did were freshmen. Jian Chen's face was rendered indistinctive with all of the mud and grime that left very little of his face unblemished. His clothes were also extremely tattered to the point of him looking like a beggar. With his current state of appearance, no one would be able to recognize him even when he was lined up in front of everyone. After hearing Changyang Xiang Tian's name, the teacher in charge of inspecting the monster cores went blank as he gave a closer look. Apparently, Changyang Xiang Tian was a name even the teacher was familiar with. However, that didn't mean that Jian Chen had the proper authority to be able to command him to bring a new table. The teacher's mouth dropped open one more time in disbelief before preparing himself to speak again, but at that moment, Baian from the academy board called out, "Someone bring out a bigger table immediately." There was a smile on his face, instead one of discontent. Instead, he was looking at Jian Chen with anticipation as if he had already guessed the reason why Jian Chen had wanted a bigger table. The vice headmaster Baian looked as if he was 34 years old, but his prestige within Kargath Academy was exceptionally high, second only to the headmaster himself. When he had spoken, all of the teachers went silent. Aside from a few teachers, the other teachers had not understood what the vice headmaster was trying to say. To think that he had asked for a bigger table even though the original table was more than enough to register a student's monster cores count, there was just simply no use for a bigger table. Soon after, a 3-meter long and 2-meter wide table was lifted up to the stage, and the original table that had been used by the inspecting teacher was taken away. Changyang Xiang Tian, you should be satisfied with this, right? The inspecting teacher sat in front of the larger table. His attitude towards Jian Chen was not very amiable. It was evident that Jian Chen's request for a larger table had left an extremely bad impression on the 50 to 60-year-old teacher. Seeing that the elder's heart had some sort of prejudice against him, Jian Chen could not help but smile bitterly. He hadn't imagined that just because of something like this, the teacher would actually have something against him. This had definitely gone against his expectations, but Jian Chen didn't mind it too much. Afterwards, Jian Chen directly removed his space belt. Unlike the other students that had removed the monster cores one by one, he directly grabbed a handful of 10 monster cores and pulled them out, lightly placing them on the table. All of these monster cores were faint white in color, and were about one circle larger than the size of an adult's finger. Seeing Jian Chen pull out 10 monster cores at once, although the appraising elder was previously unsatisfied with Jian Chen's earlier actions, he could not help inwardly nodding. However, just as the appraising elder had assumed these were all the monster cores Jian Chen had, Jian Chen's hand once again reached into his space belt, and continued to pull out a great handful of monster cores. Once again, there were 10 of them in his hand. Now there were already 20 monster cores on the table in front. Seeing this, the appraising elder's eyes lit up. He looked at Jian Chen in astonishment and inwardly thought to himself, this Changyang Xiang Tian's reputation is indeed not undeserved. Although he has not yet reached saint level, he was able to defeat a saint. It seems that he really is quite skilled. Following this, Jian Chen continued to reach into his space belt and once again pulled out a handful of monster cores to gently place onto the table. Dong dong dong, sounds rang out as the hard monster cores came into contact with the wooden table. Seeing Jian Chen once again take out 10 monster cores from his space belt, the expression of the appraising elder had instantly changed. His eyes now reflected complete shock, since by now, Jian Chen had taken out 30 monster cores, 7 more than Mu Tian had. For a student that had not yet reached saint level to have killed 30 Class 1 magical beasts within 3 days inside the forest was undoubtedly a record. Even the elder that had gone around the world and witnessed many things before could not help but be dumbstruck by disbelief. Although these magical beasts had relatively low attack power, it was by no means an easy task for a student only at the peak of the 10th Saint Force layer to kill them. When Jian Chen grabbed 30 monster cores, the teacher evaluating him became astonished, along with the other teachers behind him as they watched this inconceivable sight. Only a few teachers who had inside information on the matter had a smile on their faces while the students lined up behind him had been dumbstruck when he had pulled the 30 monster cores out. But Jian Chen didn't bother to look at the stupefied expressions on the teachers and students around him. While everyone was staring at him, his hands went into his space belt once more and grabbed another bunch of monster cores to put onto the table. When his hand refused to stop, the teachers all looked on with a sluggish expression, as the cycle repeated and he reached into his space belt and grabbed yet another handful. Soon after Jian Chen had placed a couple handsful of monster cores onto the table, the big official table was filled with monster cores. Although they were all Class 1 monster cores, because they came from different species, the cores would not be the same size or shape. Small cores were almost the size of the big toe of a person, and the biggest cores were the size of a small child's fist. Whether it was a student or teacher, both groups had been put into shock by Jian Chen. For a person who was not yet at the saint-level state to hunt and kill almost 100 Class 1 magical beast in a span of 3 days, if someone were to try to say this to someone else, they wouldn't be believed. At this moment, aside from a small amount of people, every other person would not believe that it was Jian Chen who had killed all these magical beasts. Many people had thought that the huge amount of monster cores were a result of many people helping him collect monster cores or that he had stolen them. The consensus was that he could not have killed all those Class 1 magical beasts by himself. Seeing the official table being covered by a little under 100 monster cores from Jian Chen, the teacher in charge of counting them let out a deep breath. Although in his heart he thought that Jian Chen had to have fought many other groups for their monster cores. He had to admire Jian Chen's strength however, even when it came to dishonorable acts like thievery, the teachers would not care since this is a common event in the Tianyuan continent. Seeing almost 100 Class 1 monster cores from Jian Chen, the vice headmaster Baiyan let loose an incredulous look. He knew in his heart that the reason why the second region had so many less people hunting for monster cores was because they had been robbed by Jian Chen. There was no doubt that Jian Chen had stolen all of the monster cores from someone else, otherwise, everyone would have passed the test with the monster cores they earned by a legitimate show of strength from killing magical beasts. With this recent development, the vice headmaster Baiyan was quite emotional today as even his heart shook. Though at the same time, there was a small amount of doubt, could it be that Jian Chen and Tai Ta could easily kill magical beasts without even adding qi to weapons? Were they just not using cultivation anymore? Unexpectedly, Jian Chen and Tai Ta had both killed around 100 magical beasts over the span of the last 3 days. The look in the teacher's eye was quite complicated. Soon after he had started to count the monster cores on the table, the teacher didn't ask how Jian Chen had acquired these monster cores since the definite conclusion was already clear in his mind. Chapter 50, Over 100 Class 1 Monster Cores. The monster cores were quickly counted. The elder in charge of the appraisal said, "There is a total of 98 monster cores here." This is your space belt, please return the Academy space belt now. The elder handed Jian Chen an emerald green space belt. This was the space belt that Jian Chen's father, Changyang Ba, had gifted him when he had left the Changyang clan. Jian Chen looked at the Academy space belt in his hands for a bit, and after some hesitation said, "Teacher, for the time being, please take care of my belt here. After this evaluation ends, I will return the Academy space belt." Hearing this, the elder knit his brows, and asked in confusion, "What?" Perhaps it was because Jian Chen alone had gained nearly 100 monster cores, but the elder's attitude towards Jian Chen had clearly changed. "Teacher, I still have Class 2 monster cores in my space belt, so I still need to take part in the Class 2 monster cores evaluation later," Jian Chen plainly said. Right now, the evaluation was only being held for Class 1 monster cores. The evaluation for Class 2 monster cores wouldn't begin until after this one finished. Is that so? You still have Class 2 monster cores? Hearing this, the elder had disbelief written on his face, and he looked at Jian Chen with suspicion. It wasn't only the elder, the other teachers sitting on the platform were currently looking at Jian Chen with identical expressions. Jian Chen nodded, "Yes, teacher." Hearing this, the elder let out a deep breath. His gaze towards Jian Chen grew solemn. Only now did he realize that he had really underestimated the rumors that had been going around about Changyang Xiang Tian. However, he didn't bother wasting his breath on this matter, and waved his hand, "All right, store away these monster cores. You can continue to attend the second round of evaluations." Afterwards, Jian Chen placed the 100 or so monster cores back into his space belt and left the platform. However now, both the teachers on the platform and the students surrounding him looked at Jian Chen with completely different expressions. Their gazes were complicated, mixed with jealousy, envy, and even some with disdain. After walking off the platform, Jian Chen didn't rejoin the crowd. Instead, he walked up to the people waiting for the Class 2 monster cores evaluation that were currently lined up in wait. All the students awaiting evaluation had already reached Saint level, and aside from Changyang Hu's group, all of them looked at Jian Chen with expressions of shock and doubts as he walked up to them. They hadn't even met Jian Chen in the third region, and it was obvious that they found it extremely abnormal for a person not yet a saint to be able to show off Class 2 monster cores. They really found it extremely hard to believe that Jian Chen had actually entered the third region and killed Class 2 magical beasts. In addition, he had at least managed to gain 2 Class 2 monster cores. Lined up behind Jian Chen was Tai Ta. After Jian Chen walked off, Tai Ta also arrived in front of the appraising elder. At this point, Tai Ta being the Kargath Academy's headmaster's apprentice was no longer a secret, all the teachers recognized him. When Tai Ta walked up, the appraising elder could not help but smile as he said, "Tai Ta, I wonder what your profits were like this time." Tai Ta laughed, but did not say anything in reply. Just as Jian Chen had done, he reached his hand into his space belt and directly pulled out a large handful of monster cores, before lightly placing them on the table. Tai Ta's fists were slightly larger than Jian Chen's, so each one held 14 to 15 monster cores every time. Seeing the 14 to 15 monster cores on the table, the appraising elder began to smile, as he inwardly thought to himself, as expected of the person that the headmaster has his eye on. Although he has the heart and body of a tiger and seemed to lack shrewdness, his talent really cannot help but make one sigh in admiration. After taking out 14 to 15 monster cores, Tai Ta's movements didn't stop at all. He once again reached into his space belt to pull out a fistful of monster cores. The students and teachers all stared at the table as gradually, the number of monster cores increased more and more, until there were multiple dozens. Only after Tai Ta had finally taken out a little under 100 monster cores did he finally stop. Seeing all the monster cores he had gained, Tai Ta laughed in a straightforward manner and happily said, "Teacher, these are the monster cores I have gained." At that moment, all the teachers and students in the vicinity were shocked speechless. They all stared at the slightly under 100 monster cores piled on the table with expressions of disbelief. The appraising elder let out a long breath, and then looked at Tai Ta intensely, and slowly said, "Good, good. Tai Ta, you've done very well, and have not lost any face for your master." Saying this, the elder lowered his head and began to count the monster cores. He did not inquire how Tai Ta had gained those monster cores. In his heart, he had already linked together Tai Ta's means of collecting the monster cores with Jian Chen's. The elder quickly finished counting the monster cores and said, "There are a total of 97 monster cores here." Saying this, the elder recorded it into his notebook. After he had finished taking note, the elder took out an exquisite, extremely well-made, black space belt adorned with a few gems, and handed it over along with the badge of glory to Tai Ta, and said, "Tai Ta, this is the space belt that you had left in our care, as well as the badge of glory that you have earned. Collect your monster cores, and then return the Academy space belt to the Academy." It was obvious from a single glance that this high-grade space belt had been given to Tai Ta by the headmaster after he had become the headmaster's apprentice. Otherwise, a child born into a commoner family like him would have absolutely no way of purchasing such a high-grade item like this space belt. Although these types of space belts were not uncommon in Tianyun continent, it was not something that ordinary people could own. Tai Ta's gaze was locked onto the black space belt for a while, before he shook his head and said, "Teacher, I would like to keep this space belt under your care. I still have Class 2 monster cores." "What? You also have Class 2 monster cores?" Hearing this, the appraising elder looked at him with an extremely shocked expression, with a hint of disbelief hidden as well. Hearing Tai Ta's words, the other teachers that were sitting on the platform exchanged glances of disbelief with each other. They hadn't imagined that after Jian Chen, there would be another student not yet at Saint level that had managed to gain Class 2 monster cores. That appraising elder hesitated for a bit before replying, "Tai Ta, did you go to the third region?" Although the elder's question was overstepping his responsibilities, he could not ignore the strong feelings of curiosity in his heart. Even though he had already guessed the answer, he would definitely not dare to believe it unless Tai Ta confirmed the situation. Tai Ta nodded, and spoke in a muffled voice, "Yes, I went to the third region." The appraising elder continued to ask, "Did you gain your Class 2 monster cores from killing magical beasts?" Despite the fact he was far overstepping his boundaries, nobody tried to stop him, since it was not only the elder that was extremely curious to know the answer. Even all of the teachers on the platform felt the same way, and they wanted a clear-cut confirmation. A portion of it was gained from Changyang Xiang Tian and I killing magical beasts. Tai Ta had no intention of hiding anything, but he only said half of the story. Hearing this, the elder asked in shock and disbelief, "What? You're saying that you and Changyang Xiang Tian killed Class 2 magical beasts?" Tai Ta nodded and replied, "Yes." This answer made all of the teachers on the platform stunned. Many of them couldn't believe what they had just heard, for two students not yet saints to have killed Class 2 magical beasts was unprecedented in the history of Kargath Academy. Afterwards, Tai Ta stowed away his monster cores and walked off the platform. He joined the group of people waiting for Class 2 monster cores evaluations, and stood behind Jian Chen. However, at this point, Tai Ta and Jian Chen had already become the center of everyone's attention, and the people who had failed the task that were currently standing behind them looked at the two with quite a lot of jealousy. There were many of them that had been pathetically running all over the place to escape from the pursuits of Class 1 magical beasts, and they had never imagined that Jian Chen and Tai Ta, who were not at higher levels than them, would manage to not only gain 100 Class 1 monster cores in the second area, but also gain Class 2 monster cores. This made them feel extremely disoriented, and quite a few of the upperclassmen felt embarrassed as well. Soon afterwards, the Class 1 monster cores evaluation ended. The one that had the highest number of monster cores was Jian Chen, with a total of 98 monster cores, while Tai Ta was in second place, with one less monster core. The two of them had many more times monster cores than Mu Tian, who was in third place. Amidst the crowd of people, Mu Tian's eyes flashed in astonishment at Jian Chen and Tai Ta, and he murmured to himself, "Tai Ta, Changyang Xiang Tian, your reputation is well deserved. You two are indeed experts that can defeat saints. I'd love to have a chance to interact with the both of you. Although he had had his spotlight taken away by Jian Chen and Tai Ta, Mu Tian did not show a single trace of dissatisfaction. He was still just as indifferent as before, as if this was an insignificant matter that had absolutely no impact on him. At that moment, Changyang who walked up to Jian Chen with a happy expression, and said in a low voice, "Fourth brother, the two of you are really too abnormal. Within 3 days, each of you managed to gain nearly 100 monster cores." Changyang whose tone barely concealed his happiness, and he looked at Jian Chen proudly. Jian Chen smiled wordlessly. Suddenly, his gaze shifted as he sensed something. He looked behind him to see a youth with tattered clothes glaring at him with poisonous hatred. The youth's gaze did not bother to conceal his strong killing intent, and it was so severe that Jian Chen could not help but furrow his brows. However, when Jian Chen inspected the youth's appearance a bit more closely, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. The youth was Luo Jian, who had all of his monster cores plundered by Jian Chen. Luo Jian's monster cores had been entirely stolen from him mercilessly, and he had even been heavily injured. Although it did not greatly affect his movements, since he and his group of companions had completely lost all of their battle spirit, they had been unable to gather the energy to steal others' monster cores or hunt magical beasts afterwards. Thus, Luo Jian's group had ended the task with failure. Jian Chen smiled, his expression showing a hint of disdain. He paid absolutely no mind to Luo Jian. In regards to people like Luo Jian, Jian Chen had met many of them as a wanderer in his previous world. However, very few of them had the ability to really stir up storms. The second round of monster core evaluations soon started. The students that had reached saint levels and finished their task walked up to the platform in succession. However, there were two exceptions among them, Jian Chen and Tai Ta, who had not yet reached saint level, while everyone else had. The teacher evaluating the Class 2 monster cores was still the same elder, and the assessment progressed quickly. Because of all the stealing that had occurred in the third region, the several hundred students' monster cores had ultimately been gathered by the 30 to 40 people present. Thus, all of them had much more than 2 monster cores, and many people had over 10 monster cores in their possessions. There were even quite a few people that had gained 23 monster cores. Chapter 51, Class 4 Monster Core, 1, quickly, over 10 people passed the inspection. At this time, an unusual young man came up. This young man had tattered clothes but the arrogance between his brows was present as ever. When he came up to the table, he quickly brought out a huge pile of monster cores to place onto the table. The old man in charge of the inspection obviously knew this young man, and after counting the number of monster cores on the table, he said appraisingly, "There are a total of 93 magic cores. Pretty good, Qingming Xiang, your score is exceptionally good." Hearing Qingming Xiang's name, Tai Ta, who was at the end of the line, looked at Qingming Xiang standing in front of the table, waiting for his evaluation to finish. Tai Ta's eyes were bright with battle spirit, he hadn't been able to forget his last unfinished fight against Qingming Xiang. At that time, he wasn't as strong as he was right now, especially after killing magical beasts in the forest for the past 3 days. Since he had also gained some pointers from Jian Chen, Tai Ta's current fighting abilities were far greater than they had been before. He believed that with his current strength, as well as his newly gained battle experience, he would be able to fully utilize his godly strength in the fight to make up for the difference in saint force between the two of them. There was definitely no way he'd lose to Qingming Xiang. Although Tai Ta appeared to be thick-headed, he clearly understood that this was not the time to spar against Qingming Xiang, so he could only angrily glare at Qingming Xiang's back. Eventually, he managed to suppress his strong desire to fight Qingming Xiang. Hearing the elder's praise, Qingming Xiang smiled, and his eyes showed pride and a hint of arrogance behind them. The appraising elder recorded the value in his notebook, then continued, 93 Class 2 Monster Cores, huh? If nothing unexpected happens, then you will definitely be part of the top 3 places for Class 2 Monster Cores. In addition, you are the cultivation genius, so your future is boundless. Keep working hard. Thank you very much for your praise, Teacher Steve. The elder's compliments made Qingming Xiang's arrogant expression even more pronounced. Afterwards, Qingming Xiang returned the Academy space belt and retrieved his own as well as the badge of glory, before stepping off the platform. After Qingming Xiang left, another student with similarly tattered clothes walked up to the table. He directly pulled out a large handful of monster cores. It seemed that he did not have any less monster cores than Qingming Xiang. The appraising elder smiled and nodded, his gaze resting on the youth's face as he slowly said, "Not bad, Huang Dong. It seems that your harvest this time is quite plentiful." Hearing Huang Dong's name, quite a few students below the platform exclaimed in shock. Jian Chen's expression also shifted, his gaze immediately locking onto that youth's figure. Jian Chen was no stranger to Huang Dong's name. His strength was third on Kargath Academy's top 10 experts list. Jian Chen had heard that his power had already reached the peak saint level last year, and he was only one step away from becoming a great saint. In addition, once he successfully broke through, it would signify that he could graduate. Kargath Academy's top 10 experts list referred to the 10 strongest and most formidable students. All of them had already reached peak saint level, and were not far from becoming great saints. Once they broke through, they would leave the top 10 experts circle. In response to the elder's praise, Huang Dong only smiled, and did not reply. Soon, the elder had already finished counting the monster cores on the table. Huang Dong had earned a total of 91 monster cores, 2 less than Qingming Xiang. Once Huang Dong had left the platform, more people from the top 10 experts list appeared on the platform. Almost all of them had numerous monster cores, and the first-ranked student on the top 10 experts list, Bogatti, had a total of 103 monster cores. However, among these top 10 experts, only 4 of them had completed the task, the other 6 had all been eliminated. They had encountered people of the same level as they were, but had lost to the opposite party due to a difference in numbers. Thus, their monster cores had been plundered. Very quickly, all the people on the top 10 experts lists had already left the platform. The people remaining were all extremely well known. At this point, the one who had displayed the highest number of monster cores so far was the first ranked on the top 10 experts list, Bogatti, with a total of 103 monster cores. The person in second place was the fifth ranked, one of the top 10 experts list, Jing Mingyu. She was also the sole female on the top 10 experts list. She had earned a total of 101 monster cores, 2 less than Bogatti had. The person in third place was Qingming Xiang, with a total of 93 monster cores. Although he was not on the list of top 10 experts, his power had already reached the upper saint levels, and he was also a higher-ranked elite at Kargath Academy. His abilities were not much lower than the people in the list of top 10 experts, and at Kargath Academy, he had acclaimed the title of the cultivation genius. His cultivation speed was much higher than most people's, and his abilities in battle couldn't be underestimated either. After the 3 of them had left, all the people had already determined the top 3 winners, because the only people left in line were people who were not well known in Kargath Academy. Their powers were all only primary or mid-saint levels, and there was, naturally, no way they could compare to the other 3. Changyang, whose group of 4 had managed to pillage quite a few monster cores thanks to being with Jian Chen. Although the 4 of them had equally split half the cores, each one of them had still managed to get 30 to 40 of them. Even though this did not count as that plentiful of an amount, based on their strengths, this number was already quite good. After all, they were only primary level saints. Very soon, all the saints had already finished their evaluations. Although there were people who had quite a few monster cores, none of them had more than the 3rd place holder. Right now, the only 2 people remaining were Tai Ta and Jian Chen. Currently, both the teachers on the platform and the students below it had their gazes locked onto Jian Chen and Tai Ta. The two of them weren't saints yet, but they had reached the level at which they could kill Class 2 magical beasts. This made quite a few people feel intense jealousy and emotions of turmoil. At that moment, everyone was trying to guess how many monster cores were on these two, who hadn't condensed saint weapons yet. Of course, nobody dared to use the other upperclassmen as a basis for Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's earnings. They all guessed that the two of them wouldn't have that many Class 2 monster cores on them. Jian Chen walked up to the appraising elder and removed his space belt. At this moment, the elder was looking at Jian Chen with an expression of praise. The previous prejudices he originally had towards Jian Chen had now completely disappeared. Although he was sure that Jian Chen and Tai Ta would definitely not have more than 10 Class 2 monster cores in their possessions, just the fact that the two of them had entered the third region and slayed Class 2 magical beasts without being a saint was already something that the elder had to have a whole new level of respect for. After all, this was the first time non-saints had ever been able to kill Class 2 magical beasts in the history of Kargath Academy. At that moment, the listless teachers sitting on the platform could not help but get excited. One by one, they turned their gaze towards Jian Chen. Jian Chen calmly swept his gaze across the surrounding teachers. When he confirmed that the teachers were staring at him with eyes that were bright with anticipation, his previous indifferent expression could not help a subtle smile. He directly reached into his space belt and removed a handful of Class 2 monster cores and placed them on the table. There seemed to be around 10 of them. After seeing Jian Chen take out the 10 Class 2 monster cores, many of the teachers on the platform had expressions of shock and disbelief. It was very obvious that this number had surpassed most of their expectations. After all, in terms of strength, the difference between Class 2 magical beasts and Class 1 magical beasts was extremely great. Based on their original assumptions, it would have been quite amazing if Jian Chen only had 3 to 4 Class 2 monster cores. However, they hadn't imagined that he would actually have 10 of them. Following this, without waiting for the others' minds to form any more thoughts, Jian Chen once again withdrew a fistful of Class 2 monster cores from his space belt. Currently, the number of Class 2 monster cores on the table had already reached over a dozen in number. This amount was already equal to the number of cores that some of the Saint students had gained the past 3 days. Witnessing this scene, all the teachers on the platform showed incredulous expressions. Even the appraising elder could not help but be shocked speechless at the dozens of monster cores that Jian Chen had pulled out. Although there were only a few dozen Class 2 monster cores, this still made the teacher's emotions surge even more than when Jian Chen had pulled out around 100 Class 1 monster cores in a single breath. After all, these Class 2 monster cores had been pulled out by a person that hadn't reached saint level yet. At that moment, all the teachers suddenly realized that if those dozens of monster cores had been earned by Jian Chen personally killing Class 2 magical beasts, then his future achievements would be. When the teachers thought of a student that was not yet a saint killing Class 2 magical beasts, a dozen of them in fact, they could not help but find it incredible. Vice Headmaster Chang Baiyan, who was sitting in the chairperson's spot, had a satisfied smile and murmured, "Not bad, not bad, not bad at all. The only thing that remains unknown is how many of these monster cores you were able to earn by killing magical beasts with your own strength. It seems this will have to be more closely investigated later." After taking out dozens of Class 2 monster cores, Jian Chen's movements still did not stop. His hand once again reached into his space belt and pulled out another handful of monster cores. Afterwards, Jian Chen's movements continued to repeat, and under all the incredulous teachers' shocked gazes, he continued to pull out various sized Class 2 monster cores, until the whole table was completely covered. Seeing the table full of Class 2 monster cores, all the teachers on the platform were stuck in a daze. Even the students below the platform that could see what was going on at the table had expressions of disbelief, as if they had just witnessed an unfathomable scene. The appraising elder inhaled deeply, and tried to quell his emotions of shock as well as he could to calm himself down. The monster cores on the table were ones that he had never in his lifetime seen before, and he had seen many more higher-level monster cores before. Yet these Class 2 monster cores could not be described through ordinary means. The appraising elder looked intensely at Jian Chen before lowering his head to count the monster cores. Soon, the assessment had finished. However, the elder had a shocked expression of disbelief on his face, as his emotions that had just calmed down now began to surge uncontrollably once more. He sat in front of the table in a daze, unable to open his mouth and report the number of monster cores. A few breaths later, the vice headmaster Chang Bai-en sitting in the chairperson's position could finally no longer wait any longer, and said, "Steve, hurry up and report the number of monster cores." Vice headmaster Bai-en's tone trembled slightly with excitement, although his expression was extremely calm. Hearing the vice headmaster's words, the appraising elder took a deep breath, before declaring, "Changyang Xiang Tian, number of Class 2 monster cores gained, 118. Chapter 52, Class 4 Monster Core, 2. After the appraising elder finished his statement, everyone inhaled sharply in shock. The whole arena instantly became so silent, that one would have been able to hear a pin drop. This number made even the vice headmaster Chang Bai-en speechless. His gaze locked onto the huge pile of Class 2 monster cores on the table with an expression of astonishment. This number far surpassed the amount of monster cores that the previous first-place winner, Bogatti, had. A while passed before a student couldn't help but shout out, "No way, that's definitely impossible. How could he, who isn't yet a saint, be able to gain so many monster cores in the third region, and have even way more than the school's top-ranked expert? Bogatti? This is definitely impossible. He definitely brought these monster cores from an outside source." The single input raised a flood of responses. As the student finished speaking, more and more cries of protest rang out. Jian Chen's nearly 100 Class 1 monster cores had already made many people jealous, and had made them feel that it was unfair. Now that he had taken out 118 Class 2 monster cores, which was an amount even greater than his Class 1 monster cores, the students were no longer able to accept it. Under the platform, the currently number 1 expert in Kargath Academy's rankings, Bogatti, was staring at Jian Chen's back in shock as he murmured, "His strength is obviously not yet at saint level, how could he have gotten so many Class 2 monster cores? Could it be that these monster cores really were taken from an outside source?" Bogatti also couldn't help but think the same way as the others. However, this assumption was immediately rejected by him, since before entering the forest, the school administration had completely confiscated all of the students' space equipment, and the students had all gone through very strict inspections. In addition, the forest only had one entrance, so there was no chance for someone to sneak monster cores in from the outside. Moreover, even if someone really did manage to bring them in, Bogatti believed that nobody would be stupid enough to present 100+ Class 2 monster cores at once. That would undoubtedly make the entire school shocked, and the administration would definitely hire people to investigate the situation. Nearby, a gorgeous girl in tattered clothes looked absent-mindedly at Jian Chen's figure on the platform and muttered, "How could that be? A freshman like him who isn't yet a saint actually managed to get 100+ Class 2 monster cores." The girl's melodious voice was filled with shock and incredulity. On the other side, when he heard the appraising elder announce Jian Chen's monster core amount, Qingming Xiang gaped in shock as he stared disbelievingly at Jian Chen. However, his expression soon became gloomy, and eventually became completely replaced by wrath. This was because the person in third place for the monster cores competition received rewards. Although these rewards were not worth that much to those born in major clans, like him, instead it's seen as a great honor, a verification of strength. Originally, Qingming Xiang had been placed as third, but now with Jian Chen in the picture, he had been forcibly pushed out of the top 3. This made him extremely angry. What was even harder to accept was the fact that Jian Chen still wasn't even a saint. Changyang Xiang Tian, shifting his gaze, Qingming Xiang's face became beyond gloomy as he looked at Jian Chen with a glare full of poisonous malice. In the crowd, Luo Jia's expression was equally gloomy. He glared hatefully at Jian Chen, as if he could eat Jian Chen alive with his gaze alone. Although Jian Chen's current strength was still quite weak, his spirit was extremely powerful. Perhaps he wouldn't be able to notice an ordinary gaze, but once a particularly severe gaze was pointed towards him, his soul could immediately detect it. Thus, Luo Jian's and Qing Mingxiang's malice-filled glares were immediately sensed by Jian Chen. He turned around and used the aid of his powerful soul to track the glance's sources, and easily found Luo Jian buried in the crowd. Seeing Luo Jian's dark expression, Jian Chen sneered, but did not pay any mind to it. He had swiped all of Luo Jian's monster cores from him, forcing him to fail the task. In addition, Jian Chen had injured Luo Jian as well, so it was completely normal for Luo Jian to hate Jian Chen so much. However, as Jian Chen's vision shifted towards Qing Mingxiang, his brows furrowed as he showed a helpless expression. He didn't have any enmity with Qing Mingxiang. The previous incident in front of the library was so minor that it couldn't have been the cause of such fierce hatred. The main reason was the fact that Jian Chen had forcibly pushed Qing Mingxiang out of the top 3. After all, being able to place as the top 3 among the entire academy was an achievement that was an extreme glory. This was especially true for those born in noble clans, as this honor could directly increase their status by a large amount. If it were any of the top 10 experts that had pushed Qing Mingxiang out of the first 3 places, he definitely wouldn't have felt unhappy at all. However, since the one who had forced Qing Mingxiang out of the top 3 wasn't even on the top 10 list, he was also only a freshman who did not even reach the saint level yet, causing Qing Mingxiang, Kargath Academy's cultivation genius, to feel humiliated. He couldn't imagine that a freshman that had just entered the school would end up reaching his level, and from this feeling, a hatred towards Jian Chen was born. Although there was also Tai Ta, who was the headmaster's apprentice, and thus had a greater power behind him than Qing Mingxiang had. Of course, Qing Mingxiang wouldn't dare to casually offend the headmaster. The appraising elder took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. He looked at Jian Chen profoundly, and smiled. Changyang Xiang Tian, you've really made me shocked. I hadn't imagined that someone like you who isn't yet a saint could actually gain so many Class 2 monster cores. You've already far surpassed the previous first place, Bogatti. It seems that this competition's first place has definitely been taken by you. The elder handed Jian Chen his own space belt and the badge of glory. Jian Chen laughed, and reached out to accept the items. Teacher's words are too much. Nobody can say yet who first place will be. After all, Tai Ta is still behind me. The number of monster cores he has is not any less than me. Saying this, Jian Chen restowed all of the monster cores into his space belt. Hearing Jian Chen's words, the elder shot Jian Chen a deep glance, and he smiled wordlessly. After Jian Chen had completely stored away all of the Class 2 monster cores on the table, he directly walked off the platform. Afterwards, Tai Ta walked up to the table, and began to take out his own Class 2 monster cores from his space belt. Tai Ta had entered the 3rd region with Jian Chen, and they had equally distributed the monster cores. Thus, he had pretty much exactly the same amount of monster cores Jian Chen had. After the appraising elder finished counting, it was revealed that Tai Ta had a total of 119 Class 2 monster cores, only one more than Jian Chen. After the appraising elder announced Tai Ta's total amount of monster cores, all of the people at the arena were once again shocked speechless. Below the platform, the 5th-ranked person on Kargath Academy's top 10 experts, Jing Mingyu, was in a daze. From the look in her eyes, it seemed as if she had lost her spirit. She had suddenly been forced out of 2nd place by 2 freshmen. This result was difficult for her to accept. After all, she had spent a lot of energy and effort earning those monster cores. She couldn't imagine how the 2 newly entered non-saint freshmen could have gotten so many monster cores. At that moment, an extremely beautiful girl walked up to Jing Mingyu, and intimately hugged her arms around Jing Mingyu's waist. Laughing, she said, "Sister Jing, you hadn't imagined that you would have been forced down from 2nd place by 2 new freshmen, right?" Jing Mingyu sighed, and bitterly smiled, it's really unfathomable. Those two freshmen haven't even reached saint level, and yet they were able to gain so many monster cores. The two of them even forced Kargath Academy's #1 expert, Bogatti, down to 3rd place. I really have no clue how they got their hands on so many monster cores. Could it really be possible that they had brought them in from outside? The girl giggled in response, Sister Jing, you've guessed wrongly. I believe that those Class 2 monster cores were earned from their own strength, not from outside as you suspect. The girl's words made Jing Mingyu start. Jing Mingyu turned around and glanced doubtfully at the girl, and asked in a curious tone, Xiao Lu, why do you say that? The girl smiled mysteriously, as she showed a prideful expression. In a low voice, she said, Sister Jing, I encountered those two in the 2nd region, and even stayed with them for an entire day. You cannot underestimate them, they're both very formidable. Especially that Changyang Xiang Tian, he managed to kill quite a few Class 1 magical beasts with a lousy iron rod by piercing them directly through the throat. Really? Jing Mingyu asked in shock, obviously not believing it. Of course, I saw it with my own eyes. There's no way it'd be false. The girl puffed out her chest and said firmly, also, that night, we encountered a secret attack from 20+ blue wolves. The two of them effortlessly killed all of them. What? You said that the two of them managed to kill 20+ blue wolves by themselves. Hearing this, Jing Mingyu could no longer hide her shock. Although she was already a high-level saint, she would still flee if she faced 20+ Class 1 magical beasts, let alone kill them. The girl vigorously nodded and said, that's right, Sister Jing. I personally witnessed it. Although Changyang Xiang Tian and Tai Ta haven't condensed their saint weapons, their strength is definitely not any weaker than a saint's. That's why I can promise that the monster cores in their hands are definitely not brought in from the outside. Hearing this, Jing Mingyu lowered her head and thought it over seriously. Despite the fact that Jian Chen and Tai Ta had forced her out of the top 3 places, she didn't show a trace of dissatisfaction in her expression. From this alone, it could be seen that Jing Mingyu was not a narrow-minded person. After the evaluation had finished, the award ceremony began. This time, the event's top 3 places for both Class 1 Monster Cores and Class 2 Monster Cores would receive the same rewards. The first place reward was a Class 4 Monster Core and a Medal of Honor completely made from purple coins. Both second place and third place rewards included one Class 3 Monster Core, and a Medal of Honor made from gold coins. These medals weren't worth much money, but what they represented was of extraordinary significance. Thus, even the nobles that had powerful backgrounds couldn't keep their eyes from reddening at those medals of honor. Jian Chen and Tai Ta had taken the first 2 places for both Class 1 Monster Cores and Class 2 Monster Cores, and thus earned twice the amount of rewards. Third place for Class 1 Monster Cores was still Mu Tian, and third place for Class 2 Monster Cores was Kargath Academy's #1 expert, Bogatti. After the award ceremony had finished, Jian Chen could not help but smile excitedly at the surging, pure power in the Class 4 Monster Core he held in his hand. With the Class 4 Monster Core, as well as the 200+ Monster Cores in his space belt, he had enough to last him for a long time. Based on Jian Chen's calculations, he wouldn't have to worry about not having Monster Cores to use for at least a year. Chapter 53, Becoming a Saint. After the awards ceremony finished, the students at the sports field gradually began to leave, dispersing until there was absolutely nobody left. During the past 3 days of fighting against the magical beasts in the forest, almost all of the students had numerous injuries. Now that the award ceremony was over, everyone returned back to their own dorms to treat their injuries. The only people left in the sports field were the completely uninjured students that had given up on the task ages ago. However, after experiencing this event, Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's reputations in Kargath Academy had reached its peak form. They had already become the greatest stars in the academy, no matter where one went, their names could be heard being discussed. Jian Chen and Tai Ta, as well as Chang Yang, whose group of 3, bid each other farewell, and returned to their own dorms to treat their injuries as well. In the center of the academy was a tall tower around 100 square meters large. Vice Headmaster Chang Bai-en was currently respectfully standing in the center of a room on the top of the tower. In front of him sat Kargath Academy's headmaster, lazily sitting in front of the office desk, with a smiling expression. His profound gaze also had hints of happiness and excitement reflected in them. Ah, Bai-en, it seems that a genius really has appeared in Kargath Academy this time. The headmaster excitedly said with a smile. Vice Headmaster Chang Bai-en nodded and smiled back, "Headmaster, that is not correct. This time, Kargath Academy has more than one genius, rather there are 2. These 2 are Changyang Xiang Tian and Tai Ta." The headmaster shook his head and smiled, "No, it isn't wrong. Tai Ta's talent is definitely extremely high, and he also has godly strength. However, compared to Changyang Xiang Tian, he still has a long ways to go." Vice Headmaster Chang Bai-en was surprised at this response, and he asked doubtfully, "Headmaster, why do you say that?" The headmaster let out a long sigh and said, "You definitely cannot underestimate Changyang Xiang Tian. He is quite a complicated person, no wonder the old fellow at Changyang clan kept praising him. Actually, yesterday afternoon, after I had heard the news that Changyang Xiang Tian and Tai Ta had killed a Class 2 magical beast in the 3rd region, I personally rushed over myself to secretly watch them. Although those 2 aren't saints yet, their combat abilities cannot be underestimated. Especially Changyang Xiang Tian, with just a broken iron rod, he was pretty much invincible in the 3rd region. Not only are his movements incomparably fast, they are also extremely precise. His battle experience is not anything alike to a 15-year-old youth's, on the contrary, it seems as if he's a person that has fought 100 battles already. The Class 2 monster cores in the 2's hands were pretty much completely killed by Changyang Xiang Tian alone. Tai Ta was simply involved in the fights. Hearing this, the Vice Headmaster Chang Bai-en gave an incredulous look and asked, "Headmaster, is Changyang Xiang Tian really as formidable as you say?" The headmaster nodded and said, "If I hadn't personally witnessed it, I wouldn't believe that a 15-year-old could have such powerful strength either. The most important part is his extensive battle experience and combat techniques. These are not something that can be learned just because one wants to learn it. Without experiencing hundreds of battles, these concepts just cannot be grasped. It's no wonder that old man Chang praised Changyang Xiang Tian so much. He really is an extremely talented genius." It seems these things were all taught by the old man. The Vice Headmaster Chang Bai-en looked relieved as he said, "Under the great Master Chang's guidance, Changyang Xiang Tian would find it difficult to not be renowned." The headmaster nodded and said, "Even if old man Chang is guiding from the sidelines, if Changyang Xiang Tian didn't originally have such outstanding talent, then even old man Chang wouldn't be able to teach him much, even under careful teaching. If Changyang Xiang Tian wasn't Changyang clan's 4th master, I would really make him my apprentice. After all, such geniuses are rare. If he continues to mature like this, it would be fortunate for Jessen Kingdom." After the award ceremony, Jian Chen retrieved a new uniform and then took a shower to completely wash off all of the filth on his body that he had gained from the few days in the forest. After he wore the brand new uniform, he felt refreshed as he headed back the dorm. Although he had battled virtually every single moment during his 3 days in the forest, he didn't show any traces of exhaustion. In his previous world, he had experienced even worse conditions. After returning to his room, Jian Chen sat cross-legged on his bed. He held a Class 1 monster core in each hand, and began to cultivate. Although Jian Chen's power had already reached the peak of the 10th Saint Force layer, he could clearly sense that the Saint Force in his body had not yet reached a state of saturation. As he gradually began to absorb the energy within the monster cores, Jian Chen's Saint Force once again quickly rose. His speed of cultivation was 10 times faster than when he absorbed world essence. For the next 3 days, aside from eating meals, Jian Chen used all of his time to cultivate in his room. Eventually, the saint force inside him had already reached a saturated state. No matter how much further Jian Chen tried to absorb the monster core's energies, his inner saint force would no longer continue to grow. Jian Chen clearly understood that he needed to rush to saint level and condense his saint weapon. Otherwise, the saint force within him would come to an eternal standstill. In terms of condensing saint weapons, Jian Chen had long since clearly learned the procedures to becoming saint from the school library. It used the principle of condensing all inner saint force and slowly shaping it into a saint weapon. In the end, one uses their soul to perfectly harmonize with it. Once the inner saint force is completely condensed into a weapon, then a person is officially a saint. Jian Chen didn't stop. He took out a class for monster core from his space belt, preparing to use it if needed, and immediately began to condense a saint weapon and rush to saint level. The saint force in Jian Chen's dantian was firmly contained by his soul. In the presence of his powerful soul, Jian Chen had absolute control over the saint force in his dantian. Jian Chen used his mind to control all the saint force within his dantian and gradually began to gather it together. Slowly, he formed it into the shape of a sword, and he finally began to compress it. Jian Chen's powerful soul was brought over from his previous world. Since birth, it far surpassed other people's, and under this power, the weak saint force had no way of resisting it. The saint force was firmly suppressed by Jian Chen, and he constantly compressed the sword-shaped saint force. As the saint force was compressed smaller and smaller, Jian Chen's dantian that was originally filled with saint force quickly began to lessen as well. Despite this, the strength of his saint force continued to rise, and the makeshift sword became clearer in form as well. Eventually, it became an extremely tiny sword within his dantian. At the same time, Jian Chen was still trying to condense it even more. Although Jian Chen had already successfully gathered and condensed his saint force into a sword, this didn't mean that he had already become a saint. There was still the last and most difficult step left. This step was precisely what blocked so many people in Tianyun continent from becoming saints for the rest of their lives. In this last step, he had to merge a part of his soul into his dantian to completely condense and form the sword and create a spiritual relationship with it. At the same time, he would have to completely harmonize with the saint weapon. Although this seemed simple, it was extremely difficult to do in reality. Although this step was difficult for most people, to those that had incomparably strong souls like Jian Chen, this was something that could be smoothly performed. Jian Chen directly split a part of his soul and began to merge it with the condensed saint weapon in his dantian. He then used his practiced control to quickly link the two together. Eventually, the two had completely harmonized, they were no longer separate entities. It was at this moment that Jian Chen had finally become a legitimate saint. This last step had provided absolutely no obstruction to him. Just as Jian Chen had perfectly harmonized his soul and his saint weapon, he suddenly felt something strange, as if the condensed sword within him had become his own limb. He could easily control it, and he could also clearly sense every single component of this sword. Right now, Jian Chen's dantian didn't have a single trace of saint force remaining inside it. The only thing left was the condensed sword, which acted as the new energy source. The sword seemed extremely tiny. From its width and length, it didn't seem very different from an embroidery needle. Now that he had condensed his saint weapon, Jian Chen could sense the powerful fluctuations from saint weapons far clearer than he had before. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that as an ordinary saint, he could easily defeat a person at the peak of the 10th saint force layer. Unless some unexpected or special circumstances occurred, a person at the peak of the 10th layer would absolutely be no match for a saint. Both Jian Chen and Tai Ta were amazing. With Tai Ta's godly strength, as well as his extremely powerful body, even Jian Chen, who had been training saint force since he was young, was naturally not as powerful as Tai Ta. Tai Ta's abnormal strength in addition to his formidable defense was enough to make up for any lack of Saint force. Unless the difference in strength was extremely large, there was no way he could be a match against Tai Ta. At most, they would be stuck at a standstill. Jian Chen had previously used his power at the peak 10th layer to defeat a middle-ranked saint. Although he had completely relied on the experience and battle techniques from his past world, Jian Chen's quick sword techniques and his high accomplishments in the ways of the sword, as well as his fighting willpower gained from countless experiences from life-or-death battles in his previous world were enough to make him invincible to those at the same level as him. In addition, battles with ranks higher than him weren't even worth mentioning either. At this moment, Jian Chen's expression suddenly changed. Immediately following, his dantian had surprisingly begun to tremble once more. His entire dantian began to fluctuate intensely in an unstable way. As soon as it began fluctuating, before Jian Chen could react, the world essence began to frantically burst forth. The countless surrounding world essence seemed to have been affected by some invisible attractive force, and gradually began to gather where Jian Chen was. At this moment, Jian Chen's body seemed to have left his control, and it felt as though all of his pores had suddenly opened. They frantically began absorbing the dense world essence surrounding him. The energy within the monster core in Jian Chen's hand also fiercely dropped, forming a stream of energy visible to the naked eye which flowed into Jian Chen's body. At this moment, Jian Chen's body was like a bottomless pit. It didn't matter how strong the world essence around him was, it was completely absorbed into his body like a whale swallowing water. At the same time, the energy of the class 4 monster core in his hand rapidly diminished, and the speed at which it was being absorbed was unbelievable. The originally fist-sized monster core was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. Chapter 54, Mutation of the Dantian. Jian Chen had no idea what was happening to his body at all. Since he had lost total control over his body, he was completely unable to stop the absorption of the world essence around him. Feeling his own body absorbing the world essence at such a frightening speed, Jian Chen still maintained a determination of steel despite feeling slightly pressed for time. If his body continued to absorb the world essence at this rate, it was unknown how much longer his body would be able to last before it exploded from the sudden increase of concentrated qi. But what puzzled Jian Chen the most was that he had no idea how this happened to begin with. Why did his dantian suddenly start to absorb the world essence out of the blue at such a remarkable speed? This left Jian Chen with no small amount of terror. He knew in his heart that the world essence around him was rapidly congregating and the area around him became like a storm as it flowed at a frantic speed. The gale of qi roared and whistled throughout Kargath Academy as both leaves and loose rocks were sent flying into the air. But when the world essence entered Jian Chen's dantian, it was as if he threw a rock into the ocean, as the world essence assimilated into his body leaving no indication that it was there to begin with. For that reason, Jian Chen let out a sigh of relief. Although he didn't know what had caused his dantian to go through such a dramatic change, he was glad that his body wouldn't explode from the world essence. At the same time within the high central tower of Kargath Academy, the headmaster of the academy suddenly cried out in shock, "What's happening? The world essence is fluctuating in such a violent way." As he spoke, the headmaster had already flew out of the window, leaving behind an after-image. The moment he flew through the window, he soared into the sky at an extreme speed and immediately found himself at the dorm room of Jian Chen after a few seconds. He looked at the dorm with doubt and puzzlement as he continued to stare at the room. Meanwhile, a streak of white light came blurring over and stopped a few hundred meters behind the headmaster. It was the vice-headmaster, Baiyan. Even after the arrival of Baiyan, another dozen people came flying over in rapid succession before coming to a stop behind Baiyan to look at where the world essence was congregating at. They were all teachers of the academy with strength stronger than most, and so with the violent fluctuations of the world essence, there would be no way at all for them to not notice. Bayan looked at the amassed world essence with amazement as he cried out in wonder, "Headmaster, what has happened here? Why has the world essence gathered itself in this area?" Although the headmaster's face looked focused, his eyes were staring blankly as he replied, "Even I don't know what has happened here, let's go find out." With that, the headmaster plummeted down to the ground with Bayan following right behind him. "The rest of you stay here, do not allow anyone else to come close," he called out to the teachers. All the teachers wanted to follow the headmaster to find out the answer to this mystery, but with the words of Bayan, the teachers stopped their initial momentum and returned to their original spots obediently. When it came to Bayan, no teacher dared to violate his commands. Quickly, both the headmaster and Bayan arrived outside of the door to Jian Chen's room, where the world essence was inside. As Bayan silently knocked onto the door, it suddenly smashed into pieces and the scene inside was projected towards the two. Inside, they saw Jian Chen sitting crossed-legged on his bed with his eyes closed as he continued to cultivate. The world essence was still being absorbed into his dantian with such a terrifying speed that it made his body outline blurry as a fog concealed him slightly. Seeing this phenomenon, both Bayan and the headmaster were speechless. They never would have thought that the world essence being concentrated here was because of a single person's cultivation. Not only that, but they were stunned by the amazing speed at which Jian Chen was absorbing the world essence. So it was Changyang Xiang Tian. How could this be possible, with his strength, how could he bring about such an effect like this? Bayan cried out in shock as he watched what was inconceivable to him. Even the headmaster was trembling as his eyes stared deeply at Jian Chen. After a good while, he let out a sigh, "This kid is not ordinary at all." Hearing the headmaster, Bayan nodded his head in complete belief in the headmaster. In his heart, he had always known that Jian Chen was never an ordinary student. "Headmaster, what should we do now then?" he asked. "We wait," came the reply. And so, the headmaster and vice-headmaster stood outside Jian Chen's room and waited for him to reawaken. They didn't enter his room, and didn't make a sound almost as if they were afraid of accidentally disturbing the cultivating Jian Chen. Jian Chen had long since been aware that his door had been smashed apart, but he wasn't able to move both his body and mouth since he wasn't in control. And the Class 4 monster core gripped tightly in his hand was visibly smaller now to the naked eye, its size already roughly the same size of a ping-pong ball. All of the energy and world essence that was being absorbed into Jian Chen's dantian disappeared like a stone falling into the ocean without leaving behind a single ripple of water behind. Regarding this situation within his dantian, Jian Chen was absolutely clueless and didn't understand where all of the world essence was going. Soon after some time had passed, the energy in the Class 4 monster core was completely absorbed by him. Finally within his dantian a change was happening as light specks of both azure and violet started to appear. The moment the specks appeared, his dantian suddenly started to absorb the world essence at an even faster rate, and even started to absorb world essence from a farther distance. With the azure and violet light specks, world essence from a dozen feet away felt the pull and began to rush towards Jian Chen before being absorbed through the pores in his body and into the glowing specks. Because of Jian Chen's fast absorption rate of the world essence, a faint white mist was clearly noticeable to the naked eye as it surrounded him. Because of this white mist, his own body was only faintly discernible, making both him and the area around him seem much more mysterious than before. The increase in the rate of absorption did not go unnoticed by the two men standing outside of the door. Staring at each other in the eye, they were both astonished at what they were both seeing. By this point, the entire Kargath Academy was aware of the sudden influx of world essence, but aside from the teachers, each and every student took it to be a sudden gust of wind, and took no more notice to it. Jian Chen's dantian continued to absorb the world essence for half the day before finally stopping. Jian Chen completely absorbed all of the world essence dozens of kilometers away. At the moment, aside from the completed sword made from his condensed Saint Force, Jian Chen's dantian also contained azure and violet specks of light. The specks were extremely small, and they had extremely faint glows as well. The way they flickered made it seem like they would burn out at any moment. Probing the azure and violet specks of light that had just appeared within his dantian, Jian Chen's heart momentarily grew heavy. This was the first time he had ever encountered an uncontrollable circumstance within the dantian. He had no desire to encounter such an issue. However, what he could say for certain was that these azure and violet light specks were definitely related to the uncontrollably crazy absorption of the world essence that he had experienced earlier. Could it be that these azure and violet lights are completely made of the world essence from before? Jian Chen secretly guessed. The great amount of world essence that had entered his dantian before had completely disappeared without a trace, like a rock in the large sea. This was something completely unfathomable. In addition, after absorbing that vast amount of world essence, these strange light specks had appeared within his dantian. This made it obvious to Jian Chen that the two events were connected. However, what made Jian Chen really doubtful and worried was the question: what exactly were those strange light specks within his dantian, and what did they do? Would their existence be of any harm to him? These were the questions Jian Chen was currently most concerned about. The latter question particularly made him feel unrest. After hesitating for a bit, Jian Chen finally tried attempting to control the azure and violet lights. However, after a few experiments, his mood became more and more serious. After some internal inspections, although he could clearly see the specks of light, every time he tried to manipulate them, he would suddenly discover that the light specks existing within his dantian would become similar to mirages. He could easily pass through them, and was completely unable to grab a hold of them and put them under his control. It was as if they didn't really exist. To every cultivating person, the dantian was an extremely important part of the body. Jian Chen definitely did not wish to see his dantian go through some situation beyond his control. Otherwise, for all he knew, it could prove to be fatal during some critical moment later. Whatever. Whether it's good or bad, it's not like I can do anything about it. I'm a person who has died once already anyways. Why should I care about these things? Jian Chen soon came to the conclusion that he wouldn't bother toiling over the strange changes in his dantian any longer. Since the circumstances were beyond his control, he could only calmly accept them. Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes, his gaze perfectly calm. Although successfully becoming a saint was an exciting achievement, because an uncontrollable circumstance had occurred within his dantian, he could not bring himself to be happy. Just as Jian Chen opened his eyes, the headmaster and vice-headmaster that had been waiting outside the whole time walked in together. Seeing the headmaster walk in, Jian Chen quickly got off the bed and greeted them, "Headmaster, vice-headmaster." The headmaster had a wide smile across his face as he steadily looked at Jian Chen. "Changyang Xiang Tian, the world essence you just released was abnormal. Did you encounter any problems during your cultivation? If so, don't hold yourself back and tell me. Perhaps I can help you." The headmaster said in a tone of great concern. "Thank you for your concern, headmaster. Everything has been going well, as I haven't yet encountered any problems." Jian Chen calmly said. He didn't think his dantian situation was something that the headmaster could resolve. Saying it would only stir up trouble, and it was better to just stay silent. Chapter 55, The Emperor's Recognition. The headmaster laughed joyously. "Changyang Xiang Tian, it looks like you've broken through to become a saint." Jian Chen nodded his head slightly and said, "Yes, I have only just condensed my saint weapon. And yet, I am still not sure if you've become an upper-level saint or a middle-level saint." The headmaster beamed. To him, Jian Chen was at the very least the same strength as a middle-level saint. After all, he had personally seen such a tremendous amount of world essence be absorbed by him. Although he didn't know what type of method Jian Chen had used to absorb it all, but he at the very least understood that after absorbing this much world essence, there was no way Jian Chen would only be at the primary saint level. To see Jian Chen immediately cross over the primary level to the middle level of sainthood, the headmaster couldn't help but be extremely happy. With this, his Kargath Academy could finally be proud of having such a talented student. Headmaster, I've only just condensed a saint weapon, so my strength should definitely be at the primary level. Jian Chen knew that the headmaster believed he had completely absorbed all of the world essence and asked him this question for that reason. Primary level. A voice cried. This time it wasn't the headmaster who spoke, but Baian, who was standing behind him with a look of disbelief. How could that be? You've absorbed such an enormous amount of world essence, so how could you only be at the primary saint level? I also don't know. Jian Chen's face let out a bitter smile. He didn't intend to reveal the things that happened in his own dantian. Okay, since Changyang Xiang Tian is fine, then we should leave. The headmaster's gaze was directed at Jian Chen as he said, Changyang Xiang Tian, right now you have just become a saint, and you should properly familiarize yourself with your saint weapons uses. After saying these words, the two people, headmaster and vice-headmaster, left Jian Chen's room. After leaving the dormitories, vice-headmaster Bai En with a face full of curiosity asked, Headmaster, Changyang Xiang Tian obviously absorbed a colossal amount of world essence, how could he still only stay at the primary saint level? This just doesn't make sense. When he heard this, the headmaster slightly nodded his head and said, yes, it certainly doesn't abide to common sense, or there might be a secret Changyang Xiang Tian has that we do not know of. Otherwise, how could he absorb all the world essence dozens kilometers away? It's obviously an impossible task. After saying this, the headmaster paused for a moment, then continued, this matter is something that we should not pry into. From now on, for any matters concerning Changyang Xiang Tian, as long as it doesn't cause too much of a ruckus, we shouldn't interfere. Let him grow as he wishes, as a genius path is usually made by himself. If they don't weather the storm, they will never truly grow, and with only peaceful times, they will eventually wane. Yes, Baian understands, the vice-headmaster answered respectfully. His mind was clear, in order to cultivate a genius, this would do whatever Kargath Academy would have to do. The headmaster stared off into the azure sky as he muttered to himself, Changyang Xiang Tian is 15 years old this year, to reach sainthood by his 15th year would cause quite a shock throughout the Tian Yuan continent. It really does look like Changyang Xiang Tian is a true genius, so I truly hope he continues down his path and does not die a premature death. Otherwise, this would be a heavy loss for our Jessen kingdom. It's a shame the ancestor of the Changyang clan has been missing for 100 years, if he was still alive, then his plan might have succeeded. After the headmaster left, Jian Chen continued to sit cross-legged on the bed once more and observed the azure and violet glow within his dantian. He let out a sigh. Not only did he not know what was the matter with the glows, but he also had no control over them. With another sigh, Jian Chen decided to forget about them since it would waste precious time if he did. He had already died once and already experienced many things. Aside from the maternal love he felt for his mother by Yun Tian, there wasn't much else Jian Chen cared about. Jian Chen sucked in a deep breath and slowly calmed himself. Concentrating deeply on his right hand, his heart thumped before a strong source of energy flashed as a slender longsword appeared in his right hand. The longsword was unusually thin and the entire body was a silver white, almost like a mirror that reflected the surrounding area on the blade. The sword was around 4 feet long and 2 fingers wide. Engraved on the blade next to the hilt were 2 words, light wind. This sword's appearance was almost exactly like Jian Chen's treasured sword in his previous life. Even the name itself was the exact same one, called the Light Wind Sword. Jian Chen's way of the sword placed a strong emphasis on quickness and agility. With the ability to strike in 1,000 different ways, he was like the wind that came in without a shadow, and left without a footprint. Holding on to the Light Wind Sword, Jian Chen couldn't help but smile tremendously. At the moment where he grasped onto the sword, he felt the familiarity he had with his previous world come rushing back to him. However, The only difference was that Jian Chen felt that the sword was like an extension of his arm, he didn't need to expend as much strength to control it. Jian Chen could also feel his soul connecting with the sword to establish a perfect relationship between the two. The two were one and no longer divided. This was a feeling he had never felt before in his previous world. Jian Chen jabbed out with his sword, letting the silver blade flash as it shot outwards. Ding! A clear sound was heard as the light wind sword whistled in the air. It would appear that this sword was on the same level as the ones refined from the finest of iron. Jian Chen gently caressed the blade with his left hand joyfully as if the sword was his most favorite person. To any true swordsman, the sword was the item they were the most fond of and could not replace. The sword was their life and their soul, and Jian Chen was a firm believer of that as well. When Jian Chen summoned the light wind sword, it had disappeared from within his dantian and the energy had been completely concentrated onto his hand to form the blade in real life. Not only was this sword able to deal out major damage, but this was also the source of Jian Chen's energy and replaced his dantian as the source. Jian Chen's heart thumped once more as the sword started to disappear and returned to his dantian as the mini version of the light wind sword. 2 days after Jian Chen had broken through to sainthood, he had spent the time observing the two colored glows within his dantian. Other than that, he spent most of the time in the library in order to find a book that would help shed some light on the situation with his dantian. However, he always came up empty-handed. During those 2 days, Jian Chen's breakthrough to sainthood had been passed around through the academy like a great wave since they all knew Jian Chen had gotten to that level too fast. Every student at Kargath Academy knew that he had joined the academy a few months ago at the 8th Saint Force layer. And after those few months, he had suddenly broken through to become a saint. This type of cultivation speed was far too fast, causing everyone to cry out in astonishment. This record had completely squashed out the previous #1 cultivation genius Qing Mingxiang. Far away from Kargath Academy in a splendid dazzling palace, a jewel-embedded robe-wearing middle-aged man sat in the middle of the study room while reading a book. "Your Majesty, a message courier has arrived." A respectful but deep voice called out from outside the room. Hearing that, the middle-aged man slowly put down his book and looked towards the entrance of his room. "Come in," he stated. This middle-aged man was the emperor of the Jessan kingdom. Kada senator. As the emperor spoke, the doors to the study room opened, and a man wearing a black pao entered. He was approximately 30 years old and quickly walked into the room. When he was within 30 steps away from the emperor, he immediately stopped where he was and knelt down onto his knees. "Your Majesty, a letter just came from Headmaster Ka Fei Er in Kargath Academy." Originally, the emperor didn't care at all for the letter, but the moment he had heard the name Ka Fei Er, his face immediately grew solemn and placed the book down onto the table. "Bring me the message now." "Yes, Your Majesty." A nearby bodyguard standing next to the emperor respectfully responded. He immediately took the letter in his hand, and closely inspected it. Only after confirming there were no problems with it did he walk up and hand it over to the emperor. The emperor took the letter and immediately opened it. His calm face gradually began to form a smile, as he murmured, "This Changyang Xiang Tian is indeed a heavenly genius." Not only did he defeat a saint while being at the 8th Saint Force layer, he also managed to defeat a middle-ranked saint when he was only at the 10th layer. Moreover, he had successfully condensed his saint weapon at the age of 15. This is definitely a genius. It's no wonder that he received so much praise from Uncle. With Uncle's insight, he naturally can distinguish certain people. If Uncle recommends Changyang Xiang Tian to this extent, then I should be doing something about it as well. Changyang Xiang Tian has the Changyang clan backing him, even more so since he's the 4th master. It looks like getting a hold of him will be impossible. In that case, I can only try my hardest to seduce him. Although the Changyang clan has already been silent for a dozen years, the inside information about their clan is still true. Their strength cannot be underestimated, and is enough for me to act. Since it is so, I'll just do this. The emperor seemed to have decided on something as he immediately said, "Servants, fetch me pen and ink." Soon afterwards, the chamberlain arrived with the pen and ink ready. The emperor grasped the pen and began to smoothly write out his words. He delicately picked up the paper and reread the words written on it, before slowly folding it up and leaving the study. With the scroll in hand, the emperor was escorted by a group of guards sticking tightly to him through layers after layers of halls, before finally entering a beautiful courtyard. When the emperor had just stepped into the courtyard, a 50 to 60-year-old elder came out from a room within the courtyard. He calmly looked at the emperor and smiled, "So it was your majesty that had arrived. Please come in." The emperor walked up to the elder, not yet entering the room. He handed the scroll in his hand to the elder, and solemnly said, "Senior Yi Ming, this is an extremely important letter that I want you to personally deliver to Lor City's Changyang clan." Hearing this, the elder's face grew more serious. He reached out to receive the scroll from the emperor's hand and said, "Your Majesty, don't worry. I will definitely deliver this letter." The elder clearly understood that since he was being sent to personally deliver the letter, it definitely was not just about a simple matter. After the letter in his hand was sent out, the emperor inwardly sighed, as he thought to himself, "You heir, for the sake of our kingdom's development, for the sake of our kingdom's future, your father has no choice but to sacrifice you." Chapter 56, 7th Level of the Library. Early next morning, the cross-legged Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes. He had not been cultivating for the past 2 days, and instead was spending his days at the library reading books. Every night, he immersed himself with trying to understand the sword within his dantian, in order to learn to use his saint weapon as efficiently as possible. After all, Jian Chen had only recently broken through to sainthood, and even though the saint weapon within him was connected to his mind, he still didn't know how to use the saint weapon to perfection. Jian Chen, who had experience from the previous world, still found the saint weapon in this world a fresh new experience. If he didn't spend his time familiarizing himself with it, then even connecting his soul with his saint weapon like he did with the tree branch, it would still be very hard to show off the pinnacle of his strength. The reason for this was the same as a person had a severed arm for 10 to 20 years, but the arm suddenly grew back. Since that person was familiar with living with a severed arm and now had to face the newly grown arm, they would also be a bit unfamiliar to his condition. This development required time to slowly accept and become comfortable with. Standing up from his bed, Jian Chen walked out of his room and headed towards the dining halls. Then, as per usual, after eating, he headed to the library. The doors to the library were already open, but there weren't many people inside, just the regular janitorial lady. Jian Chen looked at the nearly empty library and then walked towards the 5th level of the library. For the past few days, all of the books he had been interested in, from the 1st to 4th level, have all been completely read by him. The library had a total of 7 levels. The first 2 levels could be accessed by anyone below the saint level, while the 3rd and 4th levels would be open to those who broke through to the saint level. The 5th level of the library wasn't open to any student except for the freshman champion, so for those who wanted to read the books from that level, they would have to be a teacher from the academy. The 6th and 7th layer of the library was protected by very strong bindings, and only the headmaster and vice-headmaster could enter. For those who wanted to enter, they would need the strict approval of either the headmaster or vice-headmaster first. Even though the 5th story of the library wasn't open to the students, Jian Chen, who had achieved the first place in the freshman competition, could freely enter the 5th level. The amount of space the 5th level occupied wasn't really that big, and the number of books weren't very many either. If you added them all up, the number was barely 100, which was incomparable to the 10,000s of books that the 1st level had. But Jian Chen knew that any one of these 100 books had a value far greater than any of the books he had ever read before. The 5th level of the library was very quiet. Although not many people visited it, Jian Chen could see that this place was cleaned by someone very often. The entire room was clean, one wouldn't be able to find a single speck of dust in it. Jian Chen walked towards the bookshelves and selected a book on cultivation before walking back towards the table. The contents of the book were only about cultivation. Although he didn't know if the contents of the book would help him with his problem, it would at least enrich his mind with other information he deemed helpful. Jian Chen was extremely invested in reading, to the point of addiction. Although the information recorded inside the book had almost nothing that could help him, it still helped open his eyes and broadened his horizons to a whole new world of cultivation. The information he saw was about things he could never think about before in his past life. The information on cultivation written inside the book wasn't too profound and only had a few dozen pages, so he quickly finished the book. After reading it, Jian Chen placed the book back onto the bookshelves and started to mutter to himself, as if he was trying to commit the knowledge to memory. After carefully putting the book back in its original location, Jian Chen grabbed another book and started to repeat the process of reading once more. Within the 5th level of the library, practically all of the books were left behind by predecessors to help people with cultivation techniques. However, the majority of these cultivation techniques were not too strong, most of them were barely above the primary earth tier level. The time slowly went by, as Jian Chen resided on the 5th level to read book after book. He had completely forgotten about the time, he hadn't noticed that he was no longer alone, as 2 other middle-aged men appeared. Just one look at the 2 was enough to tell that these were teachers of the academy. The 2 middle-aged men appeared to know Jian Chen. When they saw him, their eyes let out a very surprised look. However, they did not make a sound to avoid disturbing him. Just then, an old man wearing a light blue and luxurious Chong Pao walked up from below. He looked to be in his 50s or 60s. His hair was as white as a crane, but his appearance was like that of a young man. He had a mysterious expression that constantly flashed in his eyes. The 5th level of the library wasn't too big, and so after the elderly man entered the 5th level of the library, he promptly walked to the side to get to the staircase that would lead to the 6th layer. All of a sudden, he had noticed a young child out of the corner of his eye. The elderly man came to a sudden stop as he sized up the child in his head. Immediately recognizing the academy uniform on the tall but slender child, he realized with a start, Changyang Xiang Tian. Jian Chen was immediately brought back to his senses and looked back to the old man who had called him. His face was a little sluggish before he jolted to his feet with a smile. "Headmaster, why have you come here?" This man was the headmaster of Kargath Academy. The headmaster's voice had simultaneously startled the 2 teachers. The moment they saw the headmaster, they looked startled and placed their books down onto the table before standing up. Cupping their hands to salute the headmaster, they called out respectfully, "We greet the headmaster." The headmaster of Kargath Academy was a well-known figure whose name resounded throughout the Jessen Kingdom. His strength was on the level of a Heaven Saint Master, and he was one of the 6 strongest individuals of the Jessen Kingdom. A Heaven Saint Master on the Tian Yuan continent was still regarded as a very strong and valiant person. The headmaster's gaze swept across the 2 middle-aged men and waved his hand as he said, "Don't mind me, please continue reading your books." "Yes, headmaster." The 2 middle-aged men immediately sat down again, though they didn't have the spirit to concentrate on the books in their hands. The headmaster's eyes glanced over the book within Jian Chen's hand. With a smile as he nodded his head in satisfaction, he said with a gratified tone, "Changyang Xiang Tian, do you like this library?" Jian Chen nodded his head without hesitation. "That's right, from this library, I can learn many different things. Even if the information here provides little to no help to someone, it'll still increase one's knowledge." Hearing Jian Chen, the headmaster looked at him with admiration. "Good, good. Changyang Xiang Tian, someone with your understanding and logic is hard to come by. Since you enjoy being in this library, then let me help you. Come with me." Turning around, the headmaster started to walk towards the stairway to the 6th level. Seeing the direction that the headmaster was heading in, Jian Chen fully understood the old man's meaning and was overjoyed. He immediately returned the book in his hand to the original position and followed behind the headmaster toward the 6th level of the library. Seeing Jian Chen disappear off into the staircase, the two teachers looked at his direction with some envy. The 6th and 7th levels of the library could only be accessed by the headmaster and the vice-headmaster. Those who wanted access needed the approval of one of the two first. When it came to the 6th and 7th levels of the library, these were the areas that every single teacher of the academy wanted to go to, mostly because those two levels contained high-level techniques. Not only that, but the other books in that level had rich information pertaining to many other fields. Most importantly, on the 6th and 7th levels of the library, there were records of many of the different types of spiritual treasures on the Tianyuan continent. Very quickly, Jian Chen followed the headmaster to the entrance of the 6th level. Jian Chen could clearly see the transparent bindings keeping the door shut. The bindings of the 6th level and the 7th level are all arranged by the previous generations of headmasters. The defense is very strong, and even if it is a Heaven Saint Master, it is impossible to break it within a short period of time. The headmaster's tone carried a bit of pride, and he immediately took out a token constructed from purple coin. The token had very complicated markings on it, and it seemed to be a design of some sort. The purple coin token in the headmaster's hands released a faint purple glow, and soon the purple glow grew more and more bright. At last, a ray of light like a material substance shot out and directly landed on the bindings. The transparent bindings slowly rippled twice like water, and the center slowly split apart to form a large hole that a person could easily enter through. Changyang Xiang Tian, follow me inside. The headmaster called out to Jian Chen, and directly walked inside. Jian Chen followed behind the headmaster, and they walked straight through the 6th level onto the 7th level. The library's 7th level was very empty. It was only the size of a typical room, and there was a single wooden table placed in the center. In front of the table was a small bookshelf that had a few thin books. There were two boxes on top of the bookshelf. One of the boxes was completely made of extremely precious jade, while the other was entirely made of purple coin. Both of their values were not at all lacking, and it could be seen that the items within these boxes had to be extremely important. Ever since Kargath Academy was first established, this library has always existed. Up until now, it's been here for hundreds of years already. These past few centuries, the number of people aside from the headmaster of each era that have come to this library's 7th level hasn't been small. However, every single one of them was an extremely influential power, if not an impressive expert from the Tianyun continent. You are the first Kargath Academy student to have entered the 7th level these past few centuries. The headmaster explained slowly, with an extremely calm tone. Changyang Xiang Tian, this library's 7th level is where my Kargath Academy's riches are contained. The entire 7th level is enveloped by a layer of powerful bindings. This layer of bindings were painstakingly created by the Saint Ruler, Brian, the first generation's headmaster. The items within all have special tracers. As long as the bindings aren't broken, there is no way they can be brought outside. In addition, the books inside here were all the books about cultivation methods that Headmaster Brian had collected himself, if not personally written by him. These are Kargath Academy's greatest riches. Hearing this, Jian Chen's expression became extremely serious. He hadn't imagined that the library's 7th level would be so important. The fact that Kargath Academy's first-generation headmaster had actually been a Saint Ruler that was an exceptional expert was also shocking to Jian Chen. The headmaster's gaze brightly looked at Jian Chen, and his expression changed and he said with a strict tone, Changyang Xiang Tian, right now I use my authority as the headmaster to allow you to read any book except the one inside the jade box. You only have this one chance, I hope you properly utilize it. Jian Chen solemnly nodded his head, I thank the headmaster for the help. The jade box contains items that would not be of any use to the current you, and it may even obstruct your growth. Therefore, you must not look at the items within the jade box. However, the purple coin box contains a primary heaven tier cultivation technique that you can read however much you want. However, your Changyang clan's family heirloom law of Yang Qi isn't any weaker than the Collecting Heart Sutra. Therefore, choosing whatever cultivation method you use isn't something you should be too hasty with. Okay, you can stay here by yourself and take your time to read them. Remember, you only have this once chance to enter the 7th floor of the library. I hope you treasure it. The bindings at the entrance will only prevent the people who are trying to enter. If you want to leave, you can leave directly. After finishing, the headmaster immediately turned and left the place, disappearing outside the bindings on the 7th floor, leaving Jian Chen standing there dazed. Chapter 57, Arranged Marriage. Jian Chen took in a deep breath to calm himself down before walking towards the bookshelves. His eyes swept over the shelves one by one before finally taking out a single book. He walked towards the center of the floor to a table and sat down. The book was for those who gained insights as well as techniques for breaking through a bottleneck. Even Earth Saint Masters could benefit from the notes clearly written on it, although there weren't many books on this level, but the quality of the content inside was of the utmost quality. If any one of these books were to be released to the common populace, then it would cause a widespread reign of carnage for it. Jian Chen slowly flipped the pages of the book one by one as he read it. Soon the book was finished off by him, causing Jian Chen to sink into meditation. Whatever book he grabbed had led to his eyes being opened wide to the world of possibilities. The cultivation system in this world had already long since toppled the system in his previous world. With this book, Jian Chen felt like he had a stronger understanding of this world's cultivation system now. Not too long after, Jian Chen had finished reading a dozen books from the shelves. Half of the books talked about insights on cultivation as well as the problems a cultivator might experience. The other half were books about cultivation techniques, but the strongest of these techniques were only at the upper earth tier level. What Jian Chen had found most helpful was the personal letter from Kargath Academy's first headmaster Brian. Jian Chen's eyes swept over to the purple coin box. According to the headmaster, the purple coin box contained a primary heaven tier technique. Although Jian Chen didn't have a clear idea of how valuable a heaven tier technique was, but he did know that it was still quite the priceless treasure. After all, the heaven tier techniques was the second strongest type of technique on the Tianyuan continent. There was only one other tier higher than it, Saint tier. Jian Chen slowly opened the purple coin box only to see a hand-sized book inside. On top of the cover of the book had words, Collecting Heart Sutra, written on it in bold cursive. The moment the book touched his hand, Jian Chen felt a soft sensation enter his arm. It was almost as if there was a sense of warmth to the book despite it never being touched before. The book was made of some kind of magical beast leather. It was extremely supple and strong, and hard to damage in any way. He slowly took the book out of the box and carefully started to flip through the pages to read it. He was reading it with a serious face since Jian Chen knew that such a strong cultivational technique was extremely rare to come by. Although he didn't initially plan to practice this technique, just looking at it would bring him some benefits at the very least. Though he wasn't sure if he would be able to find something of value within the book to help him with his problem. 4 hours later, Jian Chen's eyes finally moved away from the book as he bowed his head in contemplation. After he was sure he committed the contents of the book to memory, he returned it to the original box and then walked back to the table. His eyes looked at the bookshelves before he let out a sigh. With no small amount of regret, he began to head down the stairs. However, Jian Chen had profited greatly today in the 7th level of the library. On his way down, Jian Chen took a look at the 6th level of the library. Although the books within the 6th level was not as valuable as the 7th level, the profits in the knowledge gained from them were still great. To Jian Chen, the predecessors had imparted their knowledge and insights in those books, so the knowledge would prove to be extremely beneficial. Jian Chen had learned much about the many different spiritual treasures of the Tianyuan continent, something that couldn't be found anywhere on the first 5 levels of the library. By the time Jian Chen had walked out of the library, the sky had already darkened. Unknowingly, he had already spent the entire day inside the library. He'd even forgotten to eat. Growl. At that moment, Jian Chen's stomach unexpectedly made a loud sound. Jian Chen reached down to rub his stomach that was currently so empty that it had begun to hurt a bit. He smiled helplessly, and then started to walk towards the dining hall. After quickly finishing his dinner, Jian Chen went straight back to the dorms. En route, he managed to attract quite a few students' gazes. There were envious, respectful, jealous, and all other types of expressions in their looks. Jian Chen didn't pay any mind to the surrounding attention, and walked to the dorm without a sideways glance. After he entered the dorms, he could see that in the distance, there was a familiar figure standing in front of his room. He felt relieved as he realized it was his older brother, Changyang-hu. It's so late, and yet Big Brother is waiting for me to return here. Could it be he has something urgent that he really needs to tell me? Jian Chen inwardly guessed. He quickened his pace, and rushed over. Big Brother, it's already so late. Why are you waiting for me here? What is there that cannot wait until tomorrow to discuss? Jian Chen asked as he walked up to Changyang-hu. Seeing Jian Chen approach, Changyang-hu's face turned bitter, and he said with a sigh, fourth brother, you've finally returned. Where did you run off to today? I pretty much searched the entire school, yet I couldn't find you, so I have been waiting here for the entire day now. Jian Chen said apologetically, Big Brother, were you looking for me for something extremely important? Hearing this, Changyang-hu smiled happily and said in an excited voice, of course there's something. Moreover, it's something major. Come, fourth brother, let's enter the room to talk. Jian Chen nodded, and took out the key from his space belt to open the room's door. This room's door was newly replaced, since the old one had been turned to rubble by the vice-headmaster. Immediately after they entered the room, Changyang-hu closed the door, and then urgently said, Fourth brother, the clan just sent a message. You're so lucky, your big brother is really envious of you. Hearing this, Jian Chen was puzzled, and he asked in confusion, Big brother, exactly what has happened? Changyang-hu sat down on Jian Chen's bed, and said with a happy smile, Fourth brother, I guess you don't know yet. Father has already arranged for your marriage. Hearing this, Jian Chen's expression clearly became startled. After finally returning to his senses, he asked in an incredulous and shocked tone, What? An arranged marriage? Changyang-hu fiercely nodded, and excitedly replied, That's right, fourth brother. Moreover, your partner is the emperor's third princess, Princess Golan. I've heard that this arranged marriage had even been the emperor's own suggestion. Hearing this, Jian Chen's expression immediately grew more serious. He felt that this situation was extremely abnormal, and moreover, he hadn't agreed to it. He felt dissatisfied by the fact that his own marriage had been decided by his clan without him. Having such a fate decided by others made Jian Chen feel extremely disgusted. Seeing Jian Chen's expression, Changyang-hu thought that Jian Chen was worrying over Princess Golan's appearance. He couldn't help but laugh, Fourth brother, don't worry. Although I've never seen Princess Golan, I've heard quite a few things about her. Princess Golan is the emperor's third daughter. She's naturally beautiful, and her looks are enough for cities to fight over her. Since she was young, she's been a gifted genius. She has not only mastered the 4 fine arts, she's also quite a well-known talent in cultivation. At the age of 15, Princess Golan had reached the 7th Saint Force layer. She has been doted on quite a lot by the emperor, she is the emperor's beloved person, the emperor loves her dearly in every possible way. Hearing this, Changyang-hu sighed, Princess Golan's identity isn't her only good point. With just her gift at cultivation, even your own older brother couldn't compete with her. Fourth brother, His Majesty has betrothed the princess to you, this is a stroke of good fortune, so don't have such a sour look on your face. Jian Chen could only let out a sigh inwardly, Changyang-hu couldn't understand his thoughts at all. Despite Princess Golan's beauty, Jian Chen wasn't moved at all. All he wanted to do right now was to improve his own strength. He couldn't afford to waste time with a girl at the moment. Jian Chen also knew that the emperor was aware of his own achievements within Kargath Academy, otherwise, there was no way the emperor would have been so firm on his decision to betroth his daughter to him. Because this arranged marriage was proposed by the emperor, Jian Chen was absolutely powerless to go against the marriage. His parents wouldn't even dare to give up the chance to establish a friendship with the royal family, let alone a relationship with them. Aside from the emperor taking back the proposal, there would be no way for Jian Chen to refuse it, so he would have to quietly accept it. The only thing that put Jian Chen to ease was the fact that this decision was only just recently made. The official date for the marriage had not yet been announced, meaning the marriage was being put off indefinitely for the time being. This gave him a good time period to breathe. Jian Chen after all did not want to talk about this at all. In his previous life, Jian Chen was a wanderer who loved traveling around the world. Without a permanent residence to live in and using the Mother Earth as his bed, with another person by his side, he wouldn't be able to continue to that lifestyle anymore. After Changyang Hu left, Jian Chen sat on the bed by himself and contemplated deeply. One had to admit that the news from his clan had been too sudden, catching Jian Chen unprepared. I might as well spend the rest of my time cultivating. Power in the end decides everything after all. When my strength grows strong enough, even the emperor would not be able to say anything. Jian Chen sighed as he continued to cultivate. Jian Chen took out a Class 1 monster core from the pile of them within his space ring. He slowly closed his eyes, and began to absorb the power from within the monster core to cultivate it. Ever since he had broken through sainthood 2 days ago, this was the first time he was cultivating. The past 2 evenings, he had been familiarizing himself with how to use and control the saint weapon. Just as Jian Chen started to absorb the energy from within the monster cores, the speed in which the monster core was being absorbed from him was growing faster and faster, almost as if all control was lost as the energy rushed into him. As the energy frantically rushed into him, the rate had instantly increased to a speed several hundred times faster than normal. The sudden rush in cultivation speed caused Jian Chen's face to twitch in surprise. Although every cultivator greatly desired for their cultivation speed to be increased, but Jian Chen's cultivation speed had already reached a frightening level. With this absorption rate of the energy from the monster core, Jian Chen simply didn't have enough time to refine it, which served no purpose for him at all, since energy that wasn't refined by him was not controllable and would only serve to rebel against him within his own body. An end result like that would lead to consequences in which Jian Chen would have a tough time resolving. Jian Chen immediately stopped absorbing the power from the monster core. The only thing worth rejoicing about was that his process of stopping his absorption of the monster core's energy had gone very smoothly. No frightening and uncontrollable scene had occurred. Otherwise, he was afraid that he really would have gotten into deep trouble. Chapter 58, Annoyance from the Dantian. Jian Chen let out a long breath to still his emotions, as he glanced at the monster core in his hand. Although he hadn't been absorbing the energy from within the monster core for very long, he could clearly tell that the energy within the Class 1 monster core was substantially less than before. The monster core had even shrunk in size. Jian Chen inhaled sharply in astonishment at this new change. Although a Class 1 monster core did not have a large amount of energy, before he had become a saint, completely absorbing all of the energy within a Class 1 monster core would require him at least 3 nights. In the short amount of time that he had spent absorbing the energy from the Class 1 monster core, the amount of energy inside had already decreased significantly. Jian Chen couldn't possibly dare to imagine just how much energy he had absorbed into his body in that short amount of time. Afterwards, Jian Chen immediately inspected his inner body once more. However, to his surprise, he couldn't detect any of the energy he had just absorbed at all. His dantian didn't show any change, and the energy inside had no indication of growth either. it was almost as if the entire show just now was merely an illusion that hadn't occurred at all. If it weren't for the fact that Jian Chen could clearly feel that the energy in the monster core was now less than before, then Jian Chen would have thought this situation had all been in his head. This situation was far too weird to understand. His eyes creased together in deep thought, but no matter how much he thought about it, Jian Chen was completely confused. In the end, Jian Chen could only put aside the problem and begin to cultivate the absorbed energy. However, after experiencing that rapid rate of absorption, Jian Chen was very careful now and paid attention to his entire body in order to avoid the same situation as last time. But then who would have thought the moment he started to cultivate, the same event as last time would happen once more. The monster core in his hand emitted a faint glow as the energy inside coursed out of it at an inconceivable speed, before dissipating inside the meridians in his arms. Jian Chen went as rigid as a stone statue on his bed, without the smallest of movements taking place. Right now, he had finally confirmed that this was happening for real, and it was not just some sort of illusion. Just as Jian Chen was going to stop absorbing the monster core's energy, he immediately changed his mind. His entire mind was elevated to the highest level of concentration he could muster as he tried to familiarize himself with this situation. He wanted to clearly understand what was happening within his body, and what the reason was for the sudden terrifying increase in absorption. Moreover, Jian Chen wanted to know why the energy had simply disappeared into his dantian like a stone in the ocean, leaving behind no traces. The monster core within Jian Chen's hands had noticeably shrunken, and the energy inside had been steadily flowing into the meridians of his arms via his pores. With such a great flow of energy rushing into his arm, Jian Chen's skin was starting to feel a little sore from the barrage. When he was absorbing the world essence 2 days ago, its state had been much gentler, so the fast rate of absorption hadn't bothered him too much. But the monster core was different. The monster core had the energy of a magical beast condensed within it. No matter how strong the energy or how pure the soul was, it was far superior to the abilities of the world essence. The monster core also contained a berserk element inside, so when Jian Chen was absorbing the energy from within, he had felt a backlash. Jian Chen paid no attention to the pain at all, and instead completely focused his attention on the situation happening inside himself. The majority of the energy from within the monster core headed towards his dantian and trickled away, only a small portion of it was assimilated into his body. However, when Jian Chen discovered where the energy was going, his face grew bright, as the energy was flowing towards the azure and violet glows within his dantian. The energy had unexpectedly been completely absorbed by the 2 glowing balls. Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes as he stared heavily at the monster core in his hands. Throwing it away, he shut his eyes closed once more, and began to cultivate the world essence as he usually did. The world essence began to flow towards him in a steady stream, faster and faster. Although the speed was at least a dozen times faster than his regular speed, about 99% of the world essence was being absorbed by the 2 glows of light within his dantian, while he was only absorbing 1% of the remaining amount into his body. After realizing this, Jian Chen decided to rely on cultivating using the world essence. However, the speed at which he was cultivating and refining the world essence was 10 times slower than his normal speed. With this conclusion, Jian Chen's expression grew ugly. His own personal cultivation rate was cut down to 1/10 of his original rate, something he did not want at all. He hadn't imagined that the 2 glows in his dantian would be such an annoyance. Afterwards, Jian Chen tried to absorb the monster core's energy once more. His solemn face gradually loosened up as he began to think. If he were to cultivate using the energy from the monster core, then his cultivation rate wouldn't be as slow as before he became a saint. Instead, it would be 3 times as fast. The most major flaw was that the amount it took to absorb the energy in this way required a lot of effort. Jian Chen had even started to sweat from the exertion. Stopping his cultivation after a while, he looked outside the window to see the pitch-dark skies and helplessly sighed. If the glows in his dantian were to forcibly take his energy each and every time he cultivated, then the variables in his future would only get more difficult. After all, just relying on absorbing the world essence gave him a tenth of his cultivation speed. Absorbing the energy from the monster core tripled his speed, while also consuming more of his personal energy and focus, something Jian Chen couldn't endure. A single Class 1 monster core originally took Jian Chen 3 nights to absorb. Right now, absorbing that same Class 1 monster core required the same amount of time it took to make and drink a cup of tea. This meant that in a single night, Jian Chen could absorb 50 Class 1 monster cores. Even if Jian Chen was made of money, it would be difficult to say if Jian Chen could keep up with this new rate of consumption and absorption. According to his knowledge, he knew that this little bump on the road wasn't too hard to overcome. A step is a step. If I don't have any more monster cores, then I'll go out and hunt for more. It's not like the energy will always be taken away from me like this in the future. With this thought in mind, Jian Chen took out a batch of monster cores from within his space belt, and continued to cultivate once more. The night passed quickly. The second morning arrived, concluding Jian Chen's daily cultivation period. Taking inventory of the amount of monster cores he used, he sucked in a sharp breath in shock. In the span of a single night, he had unexpectedly consumed the energy from 56 Class 1 monster cores. Jian Chen smiled bitterly. Even though his space belt contained a wealthy amount of monster cores, with this rate of consumption, the monster cores wouldn't last for more than a few days. When there were no more to absorb, Jian Chen would then be forced to rely on the world essence. Right now, Jian Chen could only hope that his dantian and the 2 glows of light inside would become saturated with energy, and stop taking it from him when he cultivated. It looks like I'll have to make a trip to the magical beast forest for some monster cores later. Jian Chen muttered under his breath. With a pacified heart, Jian Chen departed from his room and walked towards the grove outside of the academy to help teach his older brother with some techniques regarding fighting, as well as helping him gain some battle experience. As the sun rose, Jian Chen worked hard to teach Changyang Hu. Eventually, as the sun was at its highest point, Jian Chen concluded his explanations. Big brother, we'll stop here for now. As far as using and transforming your energy, you'll have to spend some time on getting it down. But when it comes to battle experience, you'll just have to fight with others to slowly improve, so there's no point in practicing by yourself so meticulously. Jian Chen said to his older brother. For the past few days, Jian Chen had spent his mornings teaching Changyang Hu various aspects of techniques and fighting. Changyang Hu nodded his head, I understand, fourth brother. Right now, Changyang Hu did not think that learning from his fourth brother was an odd occurrence. He didn't know what Jian Chen's lifestyle was like back at the Changyang mansion, but he could tell that his own brother was a talented genius. Receiving some special attention would have been normal, so it wasn't that far-fetched to think that Jian Chen had learned these things from the clan elders. In addition, Changyang Hu knew that Jian Chen loved to read books, frequently spending entire days inside the academy's library. So it was possible that some of the things he knew came from the library as well. Big brother, you should slowly practice by yourself. I'll be leaving first. With that, Jian Chen exited the grove, leaving his brother to continue training by himself. In the middle of one of the academy training grounds, 2 youths wearing the same academy uniform were fiercely fighting against each other. One of them held a giant blade burning a fiery red as it emitted a sizzling chi. The owner of such a strong weapon was the gifted cultivation genius of Kargath Academy, Qingming Xiang. Qingming Xiang's opponent was holding a giant sword that was blue in color. He looked to be older than Qingming Xiang. However, his face was dripping with sweat as he concentrated on the fight. They fought ferociously, but a perceptive person would have been able to tell that the blue sword wielder was being forced to blindly defend against the red sword wielder. My lord, I concede. I cannot defend myself any longer. The blue sword holder cried out. Hearing him, Qingming Xiang immediately paused and let the sword in his hand disappear. Sha La, it seems like the duration that you can defend yourself for is getting shorter and shorter. Looks like you have to work harder in the future, the current you is weaker than in the past. The youth gave a bitter smile as he laughed, "My lord, it is not that my strength is getting worse, but that your strength is growing faster than mine. I am no longer a suitable opponent for you." Qingming Xiang looked proud at himself when he heard these words. At that moment, another student wearing the academy uniform came running over towards Qingming Xiang with an envelope in his hand. "Lord Qing, a letter from the clan elders have come. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.